the Chief Information Officer for the Franklin County Board of Commissioners. For those of you who've traveled from out of state, welcome to Franklin County and the City of Columbus. I hope we're treating you well. For those of you within the state of Ohio and Columbus metropolitan area, welcome. Just to kind of explain a few things about Franklin County, that way you kind of understand where we're coming from IT-wise. We're a decentralized model of government. We have many independently elected officials, and consequently, we have a decentralized IT model overall. We have a data center, and then we have, for our larger agencies, they have their own IT departments and staffs. And I like to call them islands of IT. So you may see IT directors and even CIOs from other county agencies. Jason over there is one. Juan Torres over here is an IT director for JFS. Jason oversees the clerk of court's IT operations. On the surface, this appears to be a challenging environment, and historically it has. In recent years, though, there have been efforts to collaborate, consolidate services, and implement enterprise-wide solutions. And collaboration has been the key to success in Franklin County, and groups have been stood up to support such initiatives. We have an IT leadership board, we have an e-governance board, and a data processing board. And the data processing board governs our primary consolidated data center. And at the city and state level, the Ohio City County IT Association has provided a platform for information sharing, collaboration, and education that continues to grow under Jason Sankey, who's seated over here, his leadership. Finally, the initiatives at the state level, thanks to Stu Davis, who will be speaking today, have had a significant impact on our counties. They've offered state term schedules, state term contracts, and they also have a knowledge services portal which we can find staff augmentation resources and interview them and hire them within a week to 2 weeks. So although we have various islands of IT, we've been able to build bridges. And from me and the Board of Commissioners and all of Franklin County, we're honored to have you here. So welcome.
So now we're going to kick off our first topic, and that is big data analytics. This session focuses on understanding the challenges governments are faced with dealing with big data analytics to meet the needs of county constituents and delivering services more effectively. The folks on this panel are Jason Reed. He's Director of State and Local Government for Quadratics. We have Curtis Clark. Curtis is the Director of Global Government, IBM Public Sector. And we also have Chris Chip Ayafoya, and he's the CIO of Tarrant County. We have Barry Condrey. He's the CIO of Chesterfield County. So at this point, I'll ask those folks to come on up and take a seat, and we'll get started.
Watch out. No fire extinguishers.
So I'm sure I wasn't able to do justice with my introductions for you folks. So I'll ask each one of you to say something about yourselves. Go ahead and start off, Barry, and go on down the line.
Sure. So I've been CIO at Chesterfield County for 11 years, and we have a centralized model to compare to Franklin County. And we have about 434,000 residents and about 100 full-time equivalents in the IT department. As I said, it's a centralized model. And like I said, I've been there 11 years. Before that, I was at the state IT agency for a couple of years. And before that, I was an IT director at Circuit City Stores. During their heyday, I was there for 14 years. So I've got a mix of private sector as well as public sector experience. And Chesterfield County sort of prides itself on quality and prides itself on leadership in different forums. So we're just really happy to be here participating.
Great. Chris?
Curtis Clark with IBM. I've been with IBM for about 20 years, they tell me. Before that, I spent 17 years in North Carolina state government in the executive and legislative branches. I'm a CPA by profession. Spent 13 years in the state auditor's office, ran a government reinvention study in the early 90s, made everybody in the legislature mad. They invited me to leave the state. Went off and did some consulting work. Was hired back in 1995 as the Deputy State Controller for Information Resource Management. That was the precursor to the CIO title in the state of North Carolina. I had both policy and operations and ran that for a couple of years. In my role with IBM today, I do what I'm doing this week, hanging out with folks that are running government operations around the world. Mostly focused on areas like policy, governance, organizational strategy, and how to really implement new technologies to transform. So I'm delighted to be here. I used to be very involved with NACo back in the day, and I guess I got the black card and they shifted me off to something else, but I'm delighted to be here now.
Oh, great. Jason?
Yeah, Jason Reed with Qualtrics. Very excited to be here. I think I'm the young buck up here. I know I look like I'm like 23.
That's a good thing.
It's a blessing and a curse, I guess. But 35. Have always been in IT, so I've been in IT for about 15 years. So yeah, definitely young as it goes in the IT space. But got my start with Intel. Was with Intel for a couple of years, and then started working with HP. And was with HP for about 10 years in the personal systems group, and then made the shift to security actually. So I was working with FireEye. I don't know if anybody's familiar with them in the security space, doing some really cool things around security and network security. And then about 2 years ago, made the change to Qualtrics, which is kind of helps manage data, collect data, and I've been there for 2 years. So. I'm excited to be on this panel with this group.
Excellent. Chris?
Thanks, Jeff. You start to know that you're a very blessed man when you find yourself on stage with a bunch of highly talented guys. So, good morning. I'm Chris Ayafo. I am the Chief Information Officer for Tarrant County, Texas. Those of you who don't know where that is, Tarrant County is in North Texas. And we have a population of almost a couple million people. I don't envy Adam, but because we have a centralized IT organization, and we do serve all of the 104 business units of Tarrant County. I've been with Tarrant County about 4 years, very briefly as the Deputy Chief Information Officer just for about 6 months. And before Tarrant County, I used to be the Deputy CIO for Maricopa County in Arizona. And before that, I was there for about 6 years. Before that, I was in private sector consulting, and also used to be a college faculty. And started off my career after engineering school as a R&D manager for Cisco Systems. That's been my short trajectory. I'm happy to be here today and look forward to doing some justice to this topic.
Great. All right, we'll get into the questions now. So I'll start off with you, Barry. Well, actually, I'm going to go down the line, and each one of you, I'm going to ask, tell us about big data and what your organization is doing with it.
Okay, so I'll go first. It's always good going first. You never want to go. You never want to go last on something like this, right? So, Chesterfield's had sort of a journey, I would call it, with regards to data and big data. We started many years ago doing pilot projects with public safety. We found public safety to be a pretty fertile area to start in. They're very structured organizations, and they have very structured data. So it's really easy to have a fairly decent amount of funding and a lot of need, right? A lot of very compelling stories that you can tell with public safety, police, fire, sheriff. And so we were able to get in and get some quick wins, frankly, looking at things like fire patterns, when you overlay the temperature and the weather and different environmental factors, predicting when fires would happen, where they would happen, that would lead to changes in staffing and so forth. So the fire department was just all over this very early. The police department followed suit, and all this pilot project sort of created a very fertile environment for us to come in and start socializing the concept of being good stewards of our data, right? So it's really sort of a foreign concept in government. If you think about it, we're really good at creating data. That's one of the things we do best is create data, terabytes and terabytes of data. But frequently it's siloed in departments. It can be siloed within silos within departments. So breaking down those silos and making all that data available has been one of the key challenges for us. So we've assembled a team. We have some key stakeholders that we've got engaged here. We've got a funded capital project for the tool set. And we feel like we're on a good path, a good trajectory to really start making a difference with the husbanding of this data that we've got in our organization. But again, what's been key for us is the pilot projects, just getting started small, socializing those wins, and then sort of building on that.
So you want to just go down the
Yes.
line?
Your turn.
Okay,
Sure.
great. Thank you. Southern, I'm a little slow this morning. When I engage in conversations about big data and analytics and how you transform it, most of the time I'm focused at the enterprise level. So what you just said is point on, right? Where are we going to start? How are we going to prove it? What are the pilot projects? How do we socialize it? And then we move forward. I spend a lot of my time talking to government leaders, like we have on the stage, about what's it going to take at a governance level to do it at an enterprise point of view. If we're going to get the real value out of data and analytics, ultimately we've got to get there. We know you've got to take steps along the way, but oftentimes what we find is the barrier to value of data and analytics is failure to discuss openly the governance and organization that's required, where it needs to be, okay, which leaders need to be at the table, and how you're going to move it forward. And then the final thing is, once you have all that, actually when you start doing the analytics, as we all know, you now have to make decisions. And what's the political appetite for decision making on reality? So a lot of our focus, my focus personally around data, is around the organization and governance to make it happen.
Well,
Okay, Jason.
when I was thinking about this topic this morning, I thought back. So I already said I'm the younger guy, but I remember life before computers. Yeah, I do.
You would
I remember going to class when I was in 4th grade and fighting for the Oregon Trail floppy disk to play. I remember when my dad got the first cell phone, the brick phone, and then the mobile phone in the car. I thought that was amazing. But now, you think of those disks. They were like what, 16 meg? I think it was. And then you had the hard disks that were maybe 128. It was amazing. Now we have, to their point, we have terabytes and terabytes of data. We're swimming in data. So at Qualtrics, we talk about 2 different types of data. One is operational data. That's the data that we see all the time. That's the data we have. So that's the what, that's the how, that's the how many. How many people are coming into our department? How many people are going through this program? The other data point that we find is also very critical is experience data. So we call that X data. So when you mix X data and operational data, so how was that experience going through the program? What was the outcome of that experience of that program? So really marrying those 2 data points really provides us a better understanding of the full picture of how a department is doing. So, talking about how leaders and how managers can better understand the performance of their department, I think it's important for leaders to come to a consensus, for there to be a standard on what is the metric that we're driving at within the department to know what success is. Are we collecting the data around that point? How are we looking at that data? How are we analyzing that and actually making actions on those points? So it's kind of the view of big data from the Qualtrics standpoint.
Great. Chris?
All right. It's Chris. So, very great perspectives. In Tarrant County, we're still at very embryonic stages of the talk of big data. And I say that because I'll qualify my statement. But generally, where we are, and I've been watching out carefully.
I'll be back in a minute. I'm sorry.
Just skip the bacon.
No worries. You just want to see what panel can see and fall back and also talk, right? So, coming back to the topic, where we are today is in the early stages, and our vision essentially is really to transform our organization into an insight organization, where we can help our county executives, leadership, to make decisions with a 3G experience, and I'll say what that means. And so where we are right now, we started off with looking at all these amalgamation of data. Our problem is not really, so to speak, big data, more so than how we can harvest intelligence across a whole spectrum of distributed data that is in all kinds of various silos today, okay? Whether it's across criminal justice systems, the courts, the public health organizations, tax, and also our economic development research office. So we're looking at all of those, and when we got to a point where we asked the question of our stakeholders, what do you want to know about the information that you have, whether it is nested in paper boxes somewhere, scanned data, whether it is, how do you make decisions without looking at each of these ecosystems as a silo, but in other words, looking across the spectrum and being able to make decisions and allocate the resources in such a way that it makes good economics, it makes good government. And so with that in mind, we went out and started a search for a tool. And when I said a 3D experience, from my 20 years in this business, what I've come to realize is that we started off with like the movie industry, the black and white movies, okay? And then we went to color television and movies. And then we went to the ability to truly be immersed in the 3D experience, the multi-dimensional experience of looking at that information. I see exactly the same thing when we went from a 1D experience in looking at one-dimensional data in paper and flat files to looking at data in terms of some basic reports, okay, reporting, and then to really what we call today the analytics and the predictive experience, right, which really says that, yeah, we're looking at that data from all the angles. And so that is what has driven our organization, and that's where we are today, and I'll be happy to share a little bit more as we evolve along here.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so I'm going to start off with another question. I'm going to give this one to you, Jason, and then the others can add in their talking points. How is data derived from the Internet of Things transforming the way governments interact with citizens?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, that is a good question.
That's why you got it.
That's why I get it first.
Thank you.
So I guess when you look at data that's coming, well, I guess engagements on the internet, right? Everything is moving to mobile. So much of our interaction or so much of our engagement that we're having with our government, we want that to be quick and we want that to be easy. So the data that we can collect via the mobile experience or via the internet, it can be very, very valuable. So we work, as a vendor and talking to different governments and different clients, you kind of get to hear some of the challenges, and they're often reoccurring, right? It's legacy systems. It's trying to reduce the silos. It's trying to take that data that they're getting and actually use all that information, right? So we have a tool that we use is what we essentially call our site intercept. So it allows us to intercept individuals on the website to collect data. We joked with NACo here before we came. I don't know if you guys went through the experience of registering with NACo online, and a lot of times to register is still a form that they'll send you. So it's a form you print out, you fill out, then you're actually faxing it in. So when I was doing that 3 or 4 weeks ago, I'm like, I have to find where's a fax machine? Do we still have those here? So those processes that we have, there's still so many paper forms out there. There's still so many paper and antiquated processes that we're putting our citizens through. They're just making the experience of dealing with government so difficult. And so, yeah, we're talking to NACo right now about helping streamline that process. So hopefully we can help everyone out with that.
Great. Any other thoughts?
So, the interesting thing about the Internet of Things is that the data for that supports that is everywhere and it's nowhere, it seems to us. This data exists in every department in my county. I have vending machines that people go to get gloves and wrenches and so forth. Those vending machines are connected to the Internet. They produce reports, right? We have school buses now that are programmed with laptops. They're propane school buses. And they require a laptop to be plugged or to connect to them over Wi-Fi to program them. They produce reports. So this data literally is everywhere. And it's nowhere for the citizens unless you have a program built, as Chris was talking about, that can take in that kind of data and treat it as an asset, really curate it, keep it up to date, and then use it as part of your master data repository. So I have not seen a lot of that. I think there are probably some case studies. Chris, maybe you've done some work with this. Internet of Things data is probably not the first thing you take off the top of the list of data sources to analyze and make available. There are so many other green fields of data out there to mine, but there's a lot of it out there. That's just my experience.
Great.
And yes, when we started off our efforts, one of the things we did first was to, again, look at some use cases. Like I said, we primarily focused on some of the areas that are a big drain on the resources. Tarrant County, counties in Texas are set up, for administration of justice, for those that don't know. And about 70% of our budget is actually expended in that area. So we build a lot of use cases there. But I'll just mention that Internet of Things, as rightly enunciated there, it produces a lot of data that is unstructured data. And whether it's building sensors, whether it is, so there's a lot of different sources of that data, just smart cities, right? Road signs, all these systems, sensors that collect data. Bottom line is that government leaders are making decisions without understanding the intelligence that is hidden, without understanding the patterns, without understanding the trends, without the ability, right? Because you have to understand historical trends in order to do any kind of predictive type layout to say that, if we begin to shift resources from this area to that area, we will do more in the promotion of good governance. Yes, so Internet of Things is just, again, the big boss word, but it really enshrines, the collection of all these data from all the sensors from all kinds of directions. And but you have to find a way to be able to mine that data, and that's where we talk about big data here.
Great.
So when we think about this area, there's so many pressure points on government leaders, right, about all this information and how their citizens are really expecting all this information to be aggregated in some sort of smart way. I was noticing, I'm the oldest person on the stage. Everybody's got a smart device up here, and I've got a note card. So,
and you're doing better with that.
But it's the way it is. But, so the challenge for the folks in the room and your colleagues is, okay, how do I get organized around that? Because at some point, the elected officials are going to be impacted directly or indirectly, right, on all of this information. And so the way they discuss it is the way we think about it as well, which is define the value and get targeted on some areas where you can begin to capture the data, right? You will always fail. I shouldn't say always, but you will fail if you try to do it too big, too fast, and you won't really get the level of insight you need. So that where can you capture that data? And there are projects all over the world doing this, right? One of my favorite ones out of Boston a few years ago was they had someone build an app on your phone that if you hit a pothole, it immediately sent a note into the city public works so they could begin to put it on their that's a Internet of Things kind of activity. So part of the challenge for technology leaders in government is to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with that? Well, the problem is you've got a lot of other things you got to do. So where do you prioritize that? How do you create an organizational, this is why I go back to governance and organization, because 37 years I keep running into the same conversations. Because projects that do not move forward isn't because the technology often didn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work. But it's oftentimes we didn't get the governance and organization right. So somehow, I've been advocating this thing and people look at me like I'm, crazy. But within your organization, can you create an innovation hub around analytics and put a few folks in it? They may not even be in your organization today, but they're somewhere in the overall organization. Can you bring them together? Again, we're seeing that in Boston, right? Boston decided to do that organizationally. So part of the challenge for the IoT space is recognizing it's coming and then figuring out, given everything else they have to do, how can I start getting my hands around some projects to show the value? We talk about smart streetlights, we talk about smart buildings, just it goes on and on, but they've got all those points of entry every day generating tremendous data. And I don't know how you do that unless you get sort of an organization under them that can begin to show the value.
That's great. So, so you just brought up the point about, big data. It's tremendous amounts of data. And I have a question, Chris. Why don't you take this one? This is, having 10 times more the data, is that 10 times more valuable?
Very good question, Jeff. And how many business people do we have in the room? Non-geeks. Just for the benefit. Just for the benefit. Just for the benefit. I know sometimes IT technology people can be a curse because we talk sometimes in ways that we think everybody understands, but we miss the point. When he talks about a lot of data, that is really the point about big data. Big data really means big. We measure data in terms of what you call a unit, a byte unit. A kilobyte is 1,000 of those bytes. A megabyte is 1,000,000 of those bytes. A gigabyte, okay, is 1,000,000,000 of those bytes. A terabyte is 1,000,000,000,000. And then when we're talking about big data, we're really talking about quadrillions of data. That's why we talk about the petabyte, okay? So one of the things that we are looking at, Jeff, in our organization is that our problem is not that of quadrillion. Our problem is not that of petabyte. Our problem is that of terabytes of data, but highly distributed across various different areas that don't necessarily talk to each other. So the question, is that a lot of data like that, does that also mean a lot of value? Well, I say yes, but no. The yes is this.
Right.
You have to be able to establish any kind of patterns. You have to be able to find a platform, which is where now we come back to analytics, right? Because the analytics really helps you look at patterns. Is there any pattern between this data, right? And if I find that pattern of that in a pattern, can I then use that historical understanding to then make a prediction, which is predictive analytics, which is the 3D effect that I talk about, that if we can help our government leaders have that 3D experience as they make decisions, it is strong contribution by IT to good government because the economics will be right. The allocation of resources will be right. And that's where I would say there's value.
Good.
May I ask a question about that?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Curtis, yes.
You're on a really critical point about skills that you're going to need in your organizations, right? So do you have the right skills to do those kinds of advanced analytics?
No. We have to rely on our industry partners like Qualtrics. We have to rely on our industry partners like IBM. We have to rely on our industry partners like SAP, because the product that we're using today, when we did all of our analysis, we're going with SAP HANA. No commercial for SAP. I thought I was never going to mention it, but I have, because Curtis pushed me to do it.
You're welcome.
But yes, sir. But the point is this, because cost is very important. You mentioned that earlier, Curtis, about cost. If you go strict the direction of big data, you're going to be talking about big lakes, data lakes, okay? The relativity around data lakes is that we used to simply have flat files and some, spreadsheets and everything and basic reporting, and then we went to data warehouses, but which is mostly structured data. When you start talking about the data lakes, you're talking about everything now, both the structured and unstructured. But in order to create a lake that is very large, what do you need? You need a lot of land to create a lagoon, right, to collect all that water. This is the same thing. Well, my government, my organization, we face a challenge. Money is finite, okay? If we go the route of creating a very big data lake, that means a lot of storage. And storage is still expensive, folks. I'm not going to go to my commissioner's court and just get that money. So therefore, as we looked at the tool and the skill set and the competencies to do this, we had to factor that in. That is why we looked for a tool that we believe was able to be programmed to go out to the various different silos where that data sits today and do what we call in-memory processing, right? So it doesn't need to, we don't have to create a big lake to put that data in it so that it can scan and run it, which will mean creating cost and storage. But to your question, Curtis, yes, we are doing a partnership with our industry partners, with the vendors that work with us, and then there will be training along the way, and then some point we will be able to self-sustain.
Yes, so I think this is a trap we sort of fall into. I think that was a very insightful answer. I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently.
Okay. It's
a trap that IT people fall into when you start talking about Moore's Law, which is really what you're talking about. You're talking about, not doubling of data, but, sort of the logarithmic increase in the amount of data that you have. And it's a trap we fall into when we start talking to our budget analysts and we start talking to our county commissioners about, we're drowning in data. We've got to do 10x amount of data. And they look at you and the first thing they think is, man, that's going to be expensive.
That's right.
That's going to cost a lot of money. We can't do that, right?
Right.
So we don't talk about how much data we have. I mean, I do talk to some of my budget people about it because I want them to know why we're asking for what we're asking for. But we try to change the conversation to, with all of this data coming from all of these places, here are some problems that we can solve. Here are some ways we can help you make better decisions. Oh, and by the way, there's a lot more data coming in, and you'll be able to make a lot better decisions. Mm-hmm. So we try to reframe that conversation a little bit. I haven't been very successful with the whole 10 times as much data, and here's a project to handle all that data. That's a really difficult discussion to have with them.
Okay. So you're just summarize what you're saying that organizations have to have a goal and their data analysts have to work in conjunction with the business management.
Yeah, that's a big part of it,
Right.
but it's the fact that we've got 10 times more or 20 times more. I mean, that's light actually in some of our systems where the more we look, the more data we find in our organization. It's got to be built on the value, in terms of what you can do with it.
Good.
And there's a very close relationship with the business that's required there, to your point.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of the difference of like knowledge and wisdom, right? You can have as much knowledge as that is out there, but if you're not using it, if you're not wise, then it's useless, right? So it's we call it data rich, information poor, right? So are you pulling insights from that data? Is that data actually helping you? I kind of touched on those metrics. So, what are those important metrics that you need to track with the department to know if it's, what are those data points? Are you tracking those? Are you visualizing those? Do you even know what those are? A lot of times when we talk to department heads, you'll ask, what are the 3 things that you measure success in your department? And where do you collect that data? And a lot of times they don't know.
Great.
Right. Different
All right.
problem.
Yeah, that is different. That's right.
Well, tell you what, Barry, I'm going to give the next one to you.
Okay.
What technology supports big data analytics, and are organizations using proper technology to be effective with big data?
So the question's about the technologies to support the big data, right?
Exactly, yes. And if the, organizations actually have that in place to
Right.
process it and
Well, the data lives somewhere in the organization currently, right? So different departments will have it locked up in different places. And so we've got the data. It's not a matter of do we have the technology we need to have the data. We have that. The challenge is in consolidating it, curating it, data hygiene, keeping it cared for, keeping it fed, keeping it replaced and refreshed so that people can actually depend on it and use it. That's where we sort of fall down on the data side. So most organizations do not come across that naturally, frankly. They might have some data silos built, some data warehouses built to use the data, but at an enterprise level that you were talking about, my experience has been many organizations do not have that currently. And our observation is that you need a certain level of agnosticism when it comes to this technology. We will not be able to have one tool for the rendering of this data. I want my users to be able to use whatever tool they're comfortable with to mine the data out of the data lake or whatever the organization of the data is that we have. So we have a variety of vendors that we work with and a variety of technologies that we work with to accomplish this. So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all thing.
no, I don't think it is either. Thoughts?
Well, obviously, IBM has some tools in this case, right, that are provided. I'm not going to dwell on those too much. I would want to talk about the continuum, right? So as you begin to analyze the data and get it in formats that you can deal with and determine your priorities and your projects, then it's really a continuum from basic data analytics like we've done in the past to predictive analytics, and then we'll have a session later this morning on cognitive and artificial intelligence and where that goes. And so part of the tool set that the leaders, the CIOs, are going to have to come up with, working with their business leaders, is what is the right set of analytical tools, and do I need to have them in-house, or can I access them by the cloud? Before anybody throws anything at me, I did explain I used to run a big state data center, right? So I get the issue of data and where it needs to be and privacy and those kinds of things. But what we're starting to see is the development of cloud analytic tools where you can take a data set, you can access off the cloud and applications so you don't have to necessarily buy it and put it in-house, use it to analyze your data, and then release it back to the cloud. So I think they're going to see a lot of innovative ways to keep costs down and access the right analytical tools when they decide what the focus projects are. But it's a continuum of functionality. And then you've got to decide. I mean, the thing that we continue to see is a lot of acquisition of product that's really being sub-optimized in the organizations. And so you've got to think, and I know these organizations aren't flush with money, last time I checked. And so you've got to somehow think through, how do I get the right tool set, like you said, and are there other ways for me to access it? So we're working with a lot of clients around the world, public and private, where we're standing up analytical tools in the cloud for them to access. They control their data. They simply access the application and then release the application back.
I would just like to point out one thing. You mentioned the cloud, right?
Yeah.
That is absolutely critical to our strategy. I mean, without the cloud technologies and without the cloud storage and the things that we can get in that environment, the elasticity in the environment, so forth, we would be where we were 5 years ago with data. It's absolutely critical to it. And in terms of security, that's something else we could have a whole other seminar about. But
That's right.
I have far better security on my data that's in the cloud than I do the data that's in my data center.
Great.
I will tell you that, absolutely.
That's fascinating.
Thoughts, Chris?
Now, just as I mentioned, two esteemed panel members here have covered it, but what I'll just add is that, again, you got to have a handle of your environment. You want to know what type of data you have and how much of the data you have, and what are your focal areas. Like I said again earlier, when you go out there to look for a tool that you're going to have to use, you're going to have to be looking at your organization in terms of whether, don't fool yourself, or well, I will speak on the behalf of my organization.
Okay.
We didn't go out there fooling ourselves thinking that we have the amount of data that the Googles of the world have, or the Facebooks, or the Amazon and so on. Okay, that is truly what you call big data. They're dealing with petabytes of data. Like I said, I have to know what our data problem is and the structure of our own ecosystem. We have lots of different types of data. They're highly distributed, and in getting the right type of tool, we'll have a focus on the types of tools that can work in that type of environment, which means, therefore, that we're really more focused a lot on analytical tools, more so than the type of tools that would churn data in the size of petabytes.
Great. All right. Any thoughts, Jason? Or
No, yeah, I guess when you're talking about collecting data and having a platform that can collect and manage that data, I mean, scalability, security, all these different points we kind of touched on before. Integration with other platforms. So, if you've already collected that data, if you already have that data, I'm just thinking of like a CRM, of an engagement with the citizen. If you already have that information from them, or if you already have the data, if there's a way to integrate that with a solution that's trying to capture the data, then there's no reason to ask them. There's no reason to collect that data again. So, a challenge though, right, is how do you integrate across different departments? And so, I guess a question for you guys, how do you guys address breaking down those barriers between, a health department, Department of Transportation, a utility department? Can you collaborate? Can you share that data? Is it possible?
Yeah, it's a big problem, quite frankly. I don't know about Chris, but I know we are very siloed in terms of in lots of different ways. We have silos within silos, and breaking down those silos and getting access to the data needs to be an absolute key part of your strategy. So we do that. We do that in a lot of different ways. But
and for us, we work primarily through governance. We even with a centralized IT organization, we still have to have very strong governance,
right.
and even around data governance, so that we can leverage peer pressure to deal with some of the folks that would rather never operate, as a team. So that's primarily.
So when you approach the business and you say, "Give me your data," and they say, "You're crazy, you can't have my data," right? So you approach the business and say, "Here's our program for taking care of your data that is so important." They're like, "Oh yeah, my data's important, yeah, And you play to them a little bit, and you make sure they understand how you're going to take care of their data, and what's in it for them. They all want to know what's in it for them, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
you have to you stroke them a little bit on the business side, and you make sure they know that data is important and how you will take care of it and curate it and give it back to them in a form that they can make good decisions on. So that's hard for IT people, right? That becomes part of the governance, it becomes part of the customer relationship management, when really all you want to do is go in there and say, "Give me access to your systems and your data," right? So it's sort of the softer side.
So, Jason, you mentioned data collection. What are the ways that counties can optimize their data collection?
Yeah, so I think it's just going back to that. If you have the data, there's no reason to collect it again. We talked about the form that NACo has. There's still so many antiquated processes out there to collect that information. As I kind of mentioned also before, we are moving to a much more mobile experience. So are we collecting data from our citizens via mobile devices? Can we do that? Can we visualize that data via mobile devices? So, a lot of tools, IBM, Qualtrics, has ways for stakeholders and leaders to view and visualize this data to actually make sense of it. So it's, we talked about these mountains and mountains of data. There's really some great tools out there to allow you to not only visualize and create dashboards, but do things like create ticketing and follow-ups and automate and streamline some of the processes with that data to improve the department, to improve the customer experience that they're having with that department. That the IT, that the people, the case manager, who's ever working with the citizen, doesn't he need to work on? I mean, it's using data and technology to actually streamline and improve processes, not make more work for the analyst or for someone within the department, but actually to improve what they're doing there.
Any thoughts?
Well, so that's back to this skill set, right, in my mind, and that is as we think about creating what, for sake of conversation, an innovation hub for analytics, then what are the skills you need in that, right? You're going to need the data scientists. You're probably going to need some program managers or project managers. And the reason you're going to need those is because of the department interactions, just like you have in a normal setup, right? You're going to have folks that understand the business side, can build the relationships, and can move that forward. But we're starting to see in some of these more advanced governments doing this, actually bringing into their organization visualization experts, right? These are these young millennials that understand all these tool kind of things, and I don't understand what they do, but I understand the output. And so what you begin to do is you get skill sets, the notion of personalization of service, right, for citizens. How are you going to do that? Well, the type of skill set you may need on your team is probably a little bit different than a traditional data scientist. And so part of the question in my mind on this issue of how you're going to use the data and all that is, do I have the right team in place?
That's right.
And what I continue to run into as I sort of get the privilege of hanging out around the world with folks trying to do it is they need to be able to sell. They need to sell it to their organization. Okay, let's just be blunt about this, right? And so you've got to have the leadership involved, you've got to have the department managers involved, and you've got to present to them, as you've both said a number of times, something that's compelling, both at a business level and they can understand. And so making sure you've got the right skill sets in your innovation hub, since I've decided that's what I'm going to call it today, and I know we can't all have those, is really important to me. Because otherwise, and I'll shut up on this, we are not going to move this forward.
Understood.
So in terms of collecting the data, application modernization is something that we do on a regular basis. All IT groups do this on behalf of the business. So as we modernize these applications, as we modernize the environments, it's important that we build in access to the data so that we can collect it. It's important that we know how we can interface with it, how we can get regular access to it, and sometimes that can influence the vendors that you select for the application modernization. So it's an important step along the way.
Sure, yeah, definitely, redoing your data model, things like that, they come into play. Chris, any thought?
I agree.
Okay, good. So at this point, I'm going to turn to the audience, and does anybody have any questions for our panel about big data analytics?
Easy questions.
Yes.
What are some examples of how we've used it? So, as I said, public safety is very fertile. It's very fertile territory right now. One thing we haven't talked a lot about is interfacing data from other organizations. So we're involved in an initiative with the state Health and Human Services Secretary who's building, has a longitudinal data system. It's called VLDS if you want to look it up, and it's sort of cradle to grave data on, I guess, on constituents. And we're trying to get involved in that to start leveraging that. The opioid crisis is something that anybody in human services that's dealing with big data now, the number one use case is probably how to deal with and how to better provide services and get in front of the opioid crisis and the addiction crisis in America. So those are some that are top of our list. Then there are other more mundane ones like being able to predict delinquency rates for tax collection, right? There's a ton of data on people who don't pay their taxes on time. And if you can improve that 1%, we collected over $1 billion in revenue. And if we can improve that collection rate, 1 to 5%, we just paid for our data program for a year. And all the data is there, so that's one that they're very interested in.
Great.
And other area, again, in narrowing the kind of the revolving door into our jails is, again, recidivism rates, right? That mouthful word there. So that's one of the use cases we have. We're also looking at how to better, predict, property values. The county is funded primarily, on property values, and that's been an area of challenge because these things, they fluctuate quite a lot. We're also looking at a use case that with some type of layering of geospatial information or, GIS information that we can look at an overlay of our county and be able to have some understanding from an economic perspective on underserved areas. So that can allow for a better distribution of the programs, especially things like our tax increment funding districts. Okay, because today they're mostly done, kind of linearly without that economic understanding. We also have, from a public health perspective, a number of other cases that we're looking at. So there's a lot of applications. If you look in terms of the jail, when we talk to our jailers, to our sheriff department, one of the things that they want to understand is to kind of be able to narrow the time window, in the bookings, right? How long does it take, to get somebody through that booking process, There's all kinds of points of data they factor into that, and they said, here's the question I really want to have an insight into. If you guys bring this thing called big data, that's what I want to see. So in that way, you can have, we have something like 15 use cases developed very specifically talking to business stakeholders.
Great. Any other thoughts?
Working, with a few other counties, San Diego County comes to mind. Workforce development is a big one for them. So it's kind of working with the criminal justice department, taking data from there, taking data from the university side, from education, and kind of building that together to better understand how they can help, within workforce development in that department. Miami-Dade's got a great 311 program where they're taking data from all different sources, pulling that together, doing things like closing the loop on those 311 requests. So, there's someone's calling in, they're upset about something, we're logging that ticket, it's going to the right department, they're closing the loop, and then they're actually having one of the managers or directors calling back to that person to say, hey, how was your experience? How was that? And they've just seen great success with, taking some of these bad experiences that people are having with the county and turning those into, hey, these guys actually called me back after I complained about this pothole. What a great county, what a great experience I had with the department.
Pothole police gets you a lot of credit. So certainly San Diego, Miami-Dade, what Boston is doing, there are a lot of great use cases around in local government in the United States the 360 view of the citizen in the health care area and the social services area is really incredibly critical. The integration of applications, there in Miami-Dade, there's an example where they were having an interesting problem in their parks where they were having a lot of water leakage, and they were trying to figure out how to deal with that, right? So they were trying to focus on putting sensors in the parks to figure out what was happening with water, and then they put cameras in the parks, and then that allowed them to get data on sex offenders that were in the parks. I mean, what happened in Miami-Dade, thanks for bringing that up. Mm-hmm. Miami-Dade's a sort of an incubation of real innovation in both specific use cases for saving money and then integrating systems in a way that you wouldn't necessarily think about. But what happened was, these folks working with the business leaders came up with new ways to start integrating those. So now you got cameras getting real information, feeding back into a system for action. So there are a lot of great use cases you're starting to see. The Ash Institute up at Harvard, Goldsmith is doing a fabulous job up there of really creating a data repository of big data and projects and use cases. Okay. Sorry, Ken.
Excellent. Well, we've come to the end of our session. One more quick question?
Kathy had a question.
All right, one more quick question.
Barry and Chris, are you seeing this, what we're seeing at Bear County, when we first of all, do you need formal ILAs with your internal departments before you could use the data?
ILAs,
Or
like an MOU
agreements?
or something?
Formal agreements? Like in,
No, actually, we have data custodian agreements that we sign, so maybe
Yes.
that's the same
Yes.
thing. We document the type of data. We've done this with GIS for years. They have to classify the data as the data owner, and then, whether it's public or medium or high security, and then we agree to do certain things as the data stewards of the data that they give us. So we've done that for years with GIS data, and we are doing that with some of our data sets from some of these organizations, because again, they don't want to just give it up because they're concerned about security and all kinds of aspects of this.
well, that's, my next question is the security. So what we found is some of the court managers were collecting HIPAA data because when the judge says, okay, Barry,
Right.
now you're going to drug rehab, we're now collecting data that's really HIPAA that they probably didn't even know it was HIPAA related. So now,
Well, they
now
should know if
someone's
they're.
having access to that,
Yeah.
and we as the custodians have to understand that. So that's where I think the knowledge from the IT people can really help these functional departments.
Yeah, you don't want to inherit a data security or data classification issue when you take the data from a user that doesn't understand their own data. Absolutely, that could be a
And the
significant
human services-
problem.
So as you start integrating and layering this data, yes, it gets very powerful, but I guess what we see, someone has to be kind of the gatekeeper and,
Right.
Just say, little yellow to.
Well, that's the governance function that
the governance.
Chris was
Mhm.
talking
Yeah.
about so much.
That-
All right.
the added complexity.
Great, appreciate it. So I'd like to thank the panel for taking the time out to participate. Fantastic information, and we really appreciate you being here. Nice. Nice. Good, thank you.
And as a plug, we are looking to really make our technology program an ongoing event. And so we ask you to join us. Tomorrow morning, we have our IT Standing Committee. We've got a lot of good things to talk about and plan. We also have our GIS Subcommittee. So we have two great committees tomorrow morning for those of you who like to get up early and go to committee meetings, but they are actually fun. So my name is Alan Shark. As our speakers are getting set up, I'd like to also welcome you and also say how much I've enjoyed working with Jeff Morningstar, NACo's new CIO. It's really been great. He and I are probably very different people, but there's not a table that you wouldn't have both of us at. We both, I think, add complementary aspects to the program. How many people might be here for the first time at a NACo CIO Summit? Okay, great. How many folks here have the title of CIO or are the head of your IT department, regardless of title? Great. And how many here are elected leaders? Welcome. You're to be congratulated for being here. I also want to recognize, now, I mentioned, and you heard from Jeff, I'm with the Public Technology Institute, that other nonprofit. We've been around for 45 years. And we have our own separate board of directors, so there's confusion, but it's all good. We have a new strategic relationship with NACo. We literally are one of 5 organizations that are housed within the NACo NLC facilities in Washington, D.C. And so we now are able to leverage much of what we do to a much broader audience. So we welcome your input. We are co-sponsoring this event. I also want to recognize our chairman, Honorable Brian O'Neill, who is a 10-term council member from the city county of Philadelphia. So I have to really be sharp here because he's my boss. Now, at great peril, I need to share some information, and there are 2 things that I'm fearful of in doing so. Number 1 is there is free Wi-Fi in this room. And so I'm going to give you that, and my reluctance is I will be giving up what has been up to now really great bandwidth. Number 2, I may also be giving up your attention because I will see people with blue tints on their face looking at their device. But that's already happening. So for those of you who did not get the word, U.S. Communities, who's been very generous in providing Wi-Fi for this room and for the Hyatt, if you look at U.S. Communities SSID and then merely go in, and the password is SAVE, capital S-A-V-E, just capital S, money, part of the same sentence with a capital M, and then NACo, capital N, capital A, capital C, small o. There goes my Wi-Fi. So what's interesting, I think, for those raising your hand, I would say a third of the folks in the room, chief information officers or other titles, used to be head of MIS, head of technology services. Some still have those titles. And one thing that's interesting is the word information. And here we're still talking about data, but in a new realm in terms of talking about data in terms of big, open, and so this is kind of like part 2 of our opening session. And part 2 is, okay, and unfortunately the word, if I had to do over again, I don't think I'd use the word evolution, because we've come so far in terms of where we began. So I'm really excited to introduce our panelists, and yet both a moderator, I serve 2 roles. One is a moderator, and one is the one who is going to actually open up the discussion with a few slides. I mean, let's face it, what is a great seminar without a few PowerPoints? So let me begin by saying that, you know, I always tell my students and my friends that government and I have a relationship that begins at birth. Government knows everything about me and more in terms of my birth certificate, a driver's license, perhaps a marriage certificate, maybe even a divorce decree. And we work our way up as we get older. We suddenly have a driver's license or a permit. And there are a lot of other pieces of information that suddenly appear, whether it be our tax records, death certificates, maybe even criminal records. So our relationship with government and data is long-standing. So when we look at why and what is open data, and it is different than big data. Big data has to do with vast terabytes and exabytes of information and what we do with it. Open data is what is it that we do with it? Where is it going? How is it being used? So the big words when it comes to looking at open data is empowerment. Whether we believe in it in our hearts or not, that's a very powerful word when one is running for election or one is a county manager saying, this is something we believe. We believe in a strong citizenry. Number 2 is transparency, a word that continually is used, and we have to stop and pause. What does that mean? It means we are strong enough to be able to share data and let people know, especially our citizens, in terms of what's going on in our counties. What is it that you should know? And it's here. This is the stuff we share with you, and you should know more because a democracy requires an educated citizenry, whether we as citizens want that or not. It's there. Also, citizen engagement, the ability to look and see what's going on and being able to respond. Now, many people in the past, and some even to this day, misinterpret engagement with credit card transactions. Oh yeah, we're into citizen engagement. We take credit card transactions and we push out reports. We're engaged. To me, that's not engagement. That's like e-government admin. And it's great. It serves a different purpose. But engagement is the actual ability to have people weigh in on decisions, be able to give their points of view, to be able to comment and post. And then finally, using Web 2 technologies, which we're going to hear about. So this little puzzle then, when it comes to open data, there are really a number of pieces to it in the most simplest of forms. First of all, we have the open data itself, the various data sets. We have the ability of transparency, the idea that we can share it or have people at least view it. And then we have the citizen engagement aspect where they can actually take it and perhaps do something with it. Now I'm using here a particular vendor's view or diagram, and I'll make this presentation available to those who are interested because this is one of the things that I hate when speakers do, and I'm doing it now, and I know you can't read this, but. So the point is, if you get nothing more out of it, the fact is there's so many aspects to open data in terms of the various forms that exist today in terms of best practices, and it gives you a sense of utility, and there are many great vendors here at NACo that are more than happy to help you figure that information out. So what's interesting is the rise of open data sites. These are the public-facing sites, and most attention has gone to the cities, like New York and Chicago. That's where most of the action has been. And here, Philadelphia. We're among the first. Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco were among the first to have open data sites. And they're kind of interesting, especially when you drill down and look at what would interest me. And the answer might be, how many restaurants were closed this week and for what reason? What is going on in terms of the health scare that I hear about in terms of a virus that may be spreading in my community or something like that? What are the data sets? And you start looking at it and you start getting ideas. And so they're very clever, they're very good, and I'm going to stop for a moment and talk about Data Montgomery, but not so much because we have Sonny Siegel, who many of you may know as CIO of Montgomery County, Maryland, who's going to talk a little bit more about that in depth. I was there for one of the lunches that they had, and it was a lot of fun. All the politicians were there. The staff were beaming. We have our open data portal. The press was there. Can you think for a moment, what was the biggest data set that got all the attention to the horror of all of us, but it was there? What do you think was the one that got everybody excited with all the press raising hands and racing out the room to check things out? What do you think it was? Any idea? Staff salaries. Man, that was big. It was salaries. They wanted to know, and I can imagine, I left. I was lucky to leave. I can't imagine. It was like, she's making more than me? Or who knows? But that was a biggie. So you don't know always what will be the one that will get everybody's attention. But what I find interesting is doing some research, which I can't help but do in setting this stage for this discussion, is how the federal government has played a very active role in at least cataloging on the national level many data sites. And one of these sites, at least up to today, is data.gov. And so looking at data.gov, that becomes a very handy site. And when I look at it deeper, I can look and see how many data sets are actually collected for counties. And it's in the thousands by different categories. So you can search, if you're looking for ideas, you can take a look at data.gov, go to counties, and you'll see all the thousands of data sites, sets that are available that will give you some ideas and perhaps challenge your information. Now the next thing that I was looking at, how many counties actually have a dedicated open data site, meaning that has its own address, its own identity, perhaps its own look? And the answer, when it comes to counties, it's only about 5 or 6. That doesn't mean that other counties do not have open data components. It just means that they are part of the regular web portal. They may appear in different ways, or the data may be dispersed among various departments. So this number, or fact, is those that were collected that have been identified as having standalone open data sites or its own identity. So when we look at the data sets right now, 117,000 open data sets for counties. It gives you a sense that this is a growing number. I looked at this last year's figure and this year, so it clearly is a trend that is growing. So that's my little opener in terms of setting the stage for our discussion. The big focus here, and I think we all agree as panelists, is not looking back per se. It is taking this moment and saying, where are we going? When people ask me, what are the fastest growing jobs in the country, for those of you who have kids who are asking you that question, data scientists is one of them. Data engineers, it's data, data, data. And now, for those of you in the room who are chief information officers, whether with that title or not, and for those who are elected leaders wondering, what does a CIO do? I have to say, this is a time where CIOs have to really reclaim the I for information. Because historically, over recent years, that I has eroded to becoming more of the chief infrastructure officer. If you look at the models that government uses today, they are borrowed from the private sector in terms of understanding what the importance was for information in the corporate end and applying it to the government end. So yeah, CIOs are the ones who keep the lights on at night, as they should. But information is key. And now in governance, we heard the word governance, I think, from Chris, which is very interesting, because now we have the rise of chief knowledge officers, chief data officers, chief innovation officers. So it's getting a little bit confusing. And hopefully through this panel, we can clarify some of that. So I'd like to introduce our panel. And you can see that it is short, both in time and in presentations, because we'd love to have interaction from you. So let me introduce myself. No, I'm only kidding. I've already done that. So we have Sonny Siegel, who, as I mentioned, is the Chief Information Officer on Montgomery County. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Sonny to say a little bit more about himself, because I'm one of those who believe that people are better describing how they would like to be seen, as opposed to someone like me reading a diagram or a sheet that might take too long. And then we have Dr. Tharandi
That's all right.
Habarachi.
Well done.
And if you saw how many, the alphabet, it takes up almost that amount of space, but welcome. Who comes to us from London and goes back tomorrow. And she's a data scientist from the Thomson Reuters labs. And we've talked, so this is going to be very, very exciting. So tell us more about yourself. Let's start with you.
Sure. I actually have a few slides I will give
We're going to
you
go to your
foundation
presentation. We're going to do,
in a bit.
Okay. This is just the opener.
Sure. So I'm a technical partnerships manager as well as a data scientist. So I have my foot in both fields. I provide kind of a translation layer between business and technology, helping each of them make sense of the other. I'm from the Thomson Reuters Labs function. So if you've heard of Thomson Reuters before, if you haven't, our products are probably more popular, like Westlaw, Clear, and Augmentin. I'm from the Labs function of the Data Science and Data Visualization Lab, working on proof of concept projects with collaborative organizations, startups, and universities. And that's a quick opener.
That's good. I just want you to get the lens from which our panelists are going to share their thoughts.
So I'm Sonny Siegel, as Alan said. I'm the CIO for Montgomery County, Maryland. It's 1 million people and counting. We're 500 square miles just north of Washington, D.C. So, that gives you an idea, of the kind of county we are. And we are in close proximity, obviously, to things that the federal government does, so we tend to follow their lead from time to time and have the issues we feel we share issues with them.
How long have you been with Montgomery County?
So I joined the county in 2012, and one of the first things we did just 6 months later was to launch a program called Open Montgomery, and that's where we were at the launch together. So 5 years.
Okay, great. So with that, would you like to come up here or sit there and I can give you the clicker, or how would you like to do it?
Well, let me come up there.
Okay.
Since I cannot see
This is your teleprompter, right?
Yes, yes. So in preparing for today's session, let's see, are the slides up?
Yeah.
Okay. And which way are they going? Yeah, good. So in preparing for today's session, which I thought is going to be evolution, of the open data movement, I thought I would give you a preview or insight into what the Montgomery County effort has looked like. Taking off from what I said about the federal government and the mention, Alan's mention of data.gov. When I arrived on the scene at Montgomery County, I was asked as part of the interview what I thought about data.gov, and not realizing that the county government, both county council and the county executive, were serious about transparency in a big way. And then by November of that year, and I joined in May, June timeframe, they passed legislation that mandated that every department post data that they would normally disclose as part of the Open Data Act. So you see, it became a default. All data was open unless it met certain exemption requirements. And those were, of course, privacy and HIPAA and all of that. So starting from that, it was more a fad, I thought. But then we launched into this open data and data access mode. And I remember being in this, in these hackathons, and people disbelieving, including ourselves, that we were in there talking about government data. We didn't have much to offer, meaning by then we had not inventoried the data. We did not know which data we could really open. We knew that we had received many Public Information Act requests, and that data may or may not be publicly posted anyway. They were sent to the requesters, directly. So with that excitement around this, we were able to get a few students and such to participate with us. But then the dialogue continued, and we began to see a few more reliable data sets that we could offer. And that resulted from the fact that we had done a data set inventory by then in doing our Open Data 2.0. We actually came up with 600 data sets, basically. And it was difficult at times to define what a data set is. So there was a lot of mutual understanding with the departments, and departments essentially resisted doing this because they felt that data that was available could be requested as part of a formal request, even by internal departments, in the form of reports, right? So, and we knew that that was going on, but that there was a lot of bureaucracy around that. And it was difficult to contend with it because department heads actually argued that data was sensitive. So we had to come to grips with that with them individually. And that created a whole set of points of contact or data, open data contacts, we call them, in each of the departments, and we started to meet with them regularly. And then we actually started to open up this data. We, to date, have almost 150 data sets out of the 600 opened. But what we did achieve is a open data implementation plan, which is on our website, by the way, Montgomery County, Maryland, montgomerycountymd.gov. And that implementation plan is actually approved year after year for any changes that we make. It's almost in legal fashion. And the Open Data Implementation Plan actually receives public input. And we have to indicate which data sets then, as recorded also on the county's open data website known as Data Montgomery, as which data sets were requested by the public and why they were being prioritized high or low relative to other data sets. So, it's going very far, actually, but it does give us a roadmap, and now are obligated to follow the roadmap in publishing the data. So obviously, data quality has been a huge issue. Data currency has been a huge issue because updating these data sets manually is not a practical way to do it if we wanted to be serious and publish these and keep them current. So back-end automation is ongoing. Some are difficult because the old legacy systems were not necessarily designed to do this. But the newer requirements or requirements for the newer systems actually specify that we should be able to open data and use open interfaces to post the data. So with that, we're consuming data internally a lot, and that's where the value has been. Gartner, as an example, was one of the consulting houses we used. PTI guided us in our efforts, and it came to light gradually that even those who were watching industry trends told us that the most value was being derived initially outside, because people are very excited to see salaries and all those kinds of things, but internally is where it was at, and I can tell you a lot of stories about how that is working out. But what will what will one do to have a similar program? I think it's not one size fits all. If your leaders, the elected officials, don't have priority on transparency and accountability, then I think for IT managers it's difficult to take this on. But if you wanted to take this on as IT managers as a data management program, I think that may sell better, because as we heard from the previous panel, and as we will hear later today, and of course some more just now in this session, the value proposition for doing data management, data analytics, and all of the cognitive data and such is a lot easier to enunciate than to do open data. That's at least my feeling. Okay, so let me stop there, but I just want to leave you with this thought. So what will Open Data 4.0 look like? It will look like whatever you want it to look like, basically, as was the case with all the previous generations of open data. But I wanted to point out to you that with these symbols there, I wanted to say that we may have open data conversationally available. We're looking into that now, where one could actually just ask questions and get answers back. But we have a lot more work to do. I think the technology is there for voice recognition and artificial intelligence, but to actually make it work with open data, I think we have some more work to do. So with that, let me stand down.
While I load the next presentation, let me ask a question. You kind of got to it. I think it's really important what Sonny said in terms of what is the implications for those in the room. And I think, who was the driving force between Open Montgomery? This wasn't, you're a bright guy. I don't think you woke up one morning and said, we needed to have an open data site. Was that driven by whom?
It was actually driven by elected officials on both sides of the aisle. The executive branch and the legislative branch.
So that makes all the difference in the world. That doesn't mean we can't be data managers and maintain the systems that do it all. But I have to tell you that I've spent a lot of time in the state of New Jersey, a lot of small counties, a lot of small cities, and there are a lot of people who said, I don't want to share this stuff. No way. Is anybody in those kind of communities today, honestly? Yeah. We are happy with what we have, and it can be taken out of context. Some of it may be kind of confidential, but there is a real pushback in terms of sharing stuff. It is one of the more difficult things in the world that goes far beyond technology, especially when you get into sensitive data, health records, justice records, when you get into permissions. Can I look at it? Can I copy it? Can I share it with somebody? And for how long? Does it have to be encrypted? Do I need a security clearance? And there are 20 other different sets that people have to think about when it comes into data sharing. So why don't you come up here, and I'm going to load your,
Sure.
because otherwise you'll never see it.
Alan, can I take a question?
Yes.
I see someone has a question in the back.
There's no mic, so I'll just stand. David Holman, Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Yeah, there's one there, but I can hear you.
It's working.
Mike, you showed us the evolution of how you did hackathons of open data.
This way.
I'm not really sure what my IT department collects. I had a conversation with my county executive. We just got a social media person on staff a month ago. He looked at me across his table and said, well, this is how we get to a hackathon in open data. And I wanted to slap him because 6 months ago, he didn't even know what that was until I told him. So next to taking his job, how do I get him to understand basically how to start this process?
Yeah, starting anywhere in working with data is a good start. I feel that the seed is sown, by the mention of doing open data in your jurisdiction. So I think you could pick up on that thread and follow through, and there's value in data. I think all of us collectively have now amplified that there is value in data identification, classification, its actual use, whether it is openly posted everywhere or not. By the way, and that is so intrinsic in everything we've done anyway. I mean, some of us have been grappling with data issues for the longest time, of course. That's inherent in our business. So I think capitalize on, the thought that the mention of it, and then steer it in the direction that you practically can. In other words, like I said, there's a lot of heavy lifting to be done, sometimes selling, sometimes technology, tools and stuff.
We're going to come back to questions because this can go on for a long time, but you just flew in. We're going to be having drinks an hour because it's a 6-hour time, 5-hour time difference. Good. Okay, it's yours.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's my first time in Ohio, and it's been a really warm welcome. So I'm looking forward to meeting you all later as well. So as I said, I'm from Thomson Reuters. I'm a data scientist and partnerships manager for the labs. We're probably better known for our product names, which has pros and cons. So we're the people who do Westlaw, Momentum, and Clear. There are a bunch of other products as well. We're active in a number of different business domains. So our main domains are probably finance and risk, providing market data, for example, to traders. Know your customer KYC solutions to risk professionals in the legal space, products like Westlaw for government and law firms, tax and accounting, and also Reuters News, which are all probably best known for. We've built expertise over a long history of bringing data across very disparate sources together and building innovative data solutions on top of that. We've also got a very long history of acquisitions. So we've learned from the experience of bringing in smaller teams, data and technology into the fold, and really learning on how to break down those silos and connect them across a wider organization. We have a very wide reach. As you see, Reuters News is read by over 1 billion people across the world. We've been working in over 100 different countries for over 100 years. In terms of open data, we partner with an organization called the Open Data Institute. They're based mainly in the UK, but have nodes across the world. And they define open data as data that can be used by anyone and for any purpose. And they see data being placed across the spectrum from open to shared to closed. Open, so it's open meaning that it's licensed so that anyone can use it. Shared, it's shared amongst a certain group of individuals or systems, and closed among a selected few. And we see data at Thomson Reuters being exactly placed across the spectrum as well. And we see data that can be moved from one end to the other. So for example, you might have closed medical research data that's aggregated and anonymized and then released as open data. Similarly, you might bring together open data and closed data together, and the analytics and solutions that you build on top of that are then closed data. We also have been working with the Open Data Institute for a number of years now. We've done some thinking around
how best to innovate and build upon not just open data, but just data across a broad spectrum. And this is some of the work we've done so far. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the idea of data identifiers, but they're crucial to data science, so I'll just give kind of a brief explanation, so bear with me. Data identifiers are essentially kind of barcodes for data. They're how you would differentiate, for example, if you had the term London in a table, how you differentiate between London, UK and London, Ontario, you might consider to use geographical coordinates to communicate exactly what you mean. Similarly, you have identifiers for companies. You might have a company registration number. For people, you might have social security numbers. And for organizations and departments, you have similar codes as well. And data identifiers are essentially a way of being able to communicate exactly what you mean, but also link data across very different sources. And it's central to how we work at Thomson Reuters and how we connect data across a vast organization. This work that we did with the ODI was based on best guidelines and best practices for not just publishing data identifiers, but also how you consume and use them in an efficient manner. And it was a precursor to us opening up one of our identifier sets that we use called PermID. And PermID is central to data infrastructure at Thomson Reuters. It's how we link data across our various different businesses as an identifier for companies, financial instruments, and people. So if we want to link data about financial data about a company together with the legal cases that they've been involved in, together with contracts that they've signed recently, we use that identifier in our various different data sets, and we're able to then pull that data together and give you a much bigger picture, a much richer one. Following on from that piece of work, we realized that there was a conversation that we wanted to have around data management principles. Data has more potential value when it can be shared, but for data to be shared, it needs to first be shareable. There are certain characteristics and features of the data itself and the environment in which it lives that makes that data much more valuable and much more shareable in the end. And I think we've talked about a few of those points, but in general, what we covered in that piece of work was characteristics such as how you structure that data, using identifiers to better communicate what you mean, using better access methods of providing APIs, for example, for anyone to freely access that data, and providing a data catalog so that data can be discovered. Designing data so that it's not just suitable for the particular application that you have in mind, but that it's usable in a wider context, in a wider environment, ensuring the long-term value of that data set. So just to give you a bit of background and to give you a look at the types of open data work that we do at TR, first I want to talk about one of the most important tools that we use. So I mentioned PermID, which is definitely one of the most important tools that we've made open. We also have something called intelligent tagging. We have a long history of natural language processing at Thomson Reuters, so essentially text analytics. And this tool allows you to essentially feed in any type of text, whether that's a report, an article, or just a random paragraph. And that is able to then tag certain entities in that data. So companies, people, events, relationships, topics, and locations, and tags that data with PermIDs, which means that you're able to then structure an unstructured data set, also link data across that data set, and across various different data sources and silos as well. And we've used PermID and intelligent tagging in a number of different open data projects. I'm just going to give you a look at two of those today. So this is some work that we've done with Transparency International last year. Properties in the London market are known to attract laundered money. So Transparency International were interested, and we were interested, in property that's owned by overseas companies and building a picture of that in London. So this is a map of London showing the different boroughs, and it shows you the percentage of properties that are owned by overseas companies that have owners that we cannot identify. So it's of interest not just to Transparency International, but also to local councils in London who are affected by rapidly rising property prices. And for the Thomson Reuters perspective, we provide risk solutions. And this is really interesting to us to see the sheer range of missing links that we see in this picture. And I'm happy to talk a bit more about that later. Another project that we've done is with a startup called Think Data. They're based in Canada. And they aggregate procurement data, both from the US and Canada as well. And we work with them to integrate perm IDs, identifiers, into their data set, making it much more linkable, much more searchable. And that means that you can then look at a certain entity that's involved in a contract and see the network of activity that is related to that entity. And that makes that data set not just richer in its own right, but it means that now that data set is much more connectable with the world of Thomson Reuters data, giving you a much richer and much bigger picture of procurement contracts. And that's a quick overview of the types of work that we do at Thomson Reuters, and looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent, thank you. So, there were a number of questions. Now we have a broader range of applications along with data as well as a governance aspect. Your chance to ask questions or to share some of the stories that you may have encountered yourself. Yeah, your microphone's right there.
The question is for Sunny. I don't know if you can hear me or not. The question related to your data management program when it was first established. Did you have any formalized data inventory and or classification systems that were used to kind of do an overall inventory of all of your data sets?
We had a IT perspective inventory of systems. We did not have a data set inventory. We had I should say we had a database inventory. They're different, actually, if you look under the covers, because a data set could have been a spreadsheet for the longest time, you know, and never made it into an automated system or in a database structure. So that's where the challenge was, too. No, we did not have going into the program.
So that's an excellent question. It was actually part of what I was going to ask. I know that the NACo, the National Association of State CIOs, just worked on and put together a data classification, data governance policy and data classification template. And we've started taking that along with our state's template to do that data classification, because the counties that I work with, and we talk about this all the time, is I have in my head where all my data is, or we have a little bit of it on paper, or not on paper, but in an Excel spreadsheet or a listing. And really what's needed to get to the open data and to utilizing analytics better is to have that list, have the location, whether it's in an Excel database or spreadsheet or Access database or paper, and then have the business department listed, who's responsible for it, but also what are the areas that you have to be aware of, whether it's PII, HIPAA, PCI, and you know, if I can talk to a CIO and say, do you have that right now? The answer I get is kind of. So I'm curious to know if either of you have gone that direction. I know, Sunny, you just responded a little bit, but what your thoughts are there.
You go first.
So, well, I think there's several sides to that. So in terms of data management practices, we see that there's several different stages that you need to reach in order to make that data actually usable for analytics. And it really comes down to what do you actually want to do with that data? And answering that question and focusing first on the application and who's actually the end user can help you then kind of bring that back to what do you actually need to do to make that actually usable in that pipeline. So I guess my question back to you is, you know, what would you be looking to use that data for?
Well, what's driving it now that is actually taking more hold is the whole security factor. And if you don't know where your data is, you don't know if you have exposures or potential exposures or what you need to lock down better. And that's the driver, but the added benefit is getting to the ability to do the analytics and to ask the end user, hey, we know we have this data. What are the questions you get asked every day that you just can't produce, you know, the analytics for?
In our evolution of it, I want to, you prompted something in my mind. in our evolution, actually, it is good that we did the inventory of data or data sets, because when it comes to security, I'm able to leverage that inventory. You know, I'm kind of using it in reverse because I got forced into doing this open data thing first. Okay.
Glenn.
Piggyback on that, I think it's a much easier sell to departments to be able to say it's for security purposes. We're putting our arms around you and making sure that everything is safe, because otherwise they're reluctant to give us access to the data that they work so hard to accumulate.
And that becomes really tricky when you're also dealing with public safety, who say you come to my domain, you have to be sworn or you have to have a security clearance, and that becomes very, very tricky. Other questions? We have time for one more.
So when we segregate the interest in open data between business and citizens in Montgomery County, what would you say are the top 3 data sets that citizens are most interested in or accessing the most?
Yes, you know, so there's a distinction between what our business partners or partners out there, formal or not, are using it for, and what the constituency or the citizens are using it for. The data that's most popular is the data set that comes from our 311 system. They do about 1 million work order requests a year. And that gives great insight into both the individual constituent who wants to know sometimes whether they are the only ones experiencing an issue, such as solid waste pickups, right? Working or not working in their area. And they can look this up. Recently, we actually identified an issue with one of the solid waste disposal companies that way, because it was the public that informed us that they were experiencing issues. And that brings us to the point of analyzing data on a continual basis within government, meaning we're accumulating open data, we're publishing it. Are we actually analyzing all of it all the time? And the answer is not yet. You know?
I've always said data is like rain. We're just learning how to get it into buckets. But I also remind myself, and I have one last question, and we're going to take a break. And that is, we do a certified CIO course, and I should have said Barry Condra. I want to recognize him for being one of our graduates, Chester County. One of the students at the very end of graduation, fearful of a bad grade, said to me, I'm really angry at you. And I was really taken back because he was a star student in our certification class. I said, why? He said, you don't have respect for me as a data scientist. And I said, why do you think that? And he said, because you always talk about just publishing data on a website is not enough. That you always want to go the next step and figure out how does it get into the hands of people who can make decisions to make more data-driven decisions. And there was a disconnect, clearly. That's not what I meant, but he was obviously very sensitive. So we have to be very careful how we deal with the various silos and where their expertise comes and goes. Talking to many data folks who run these sites, they are so proud. And because it has taken so long, it's been so difficult and so challenging to even get something published, that if you didn't say, oh, that's nice, but what, they really get upset. So we have to be very careful. Last question for you. How can industry, because you're representing industry, how can industry contribute to this data, open data ecosystem? Because to me, you're here and you're listening to some of the things here. You know, we need to have more private public partnerships. Yeah. What is your vision for that? What are some tips that you might share with us?
I think we're seeing a lot of value in partnering with the innovation ecosystem that we find ourselves in various local communities around the world that we're present in, tapping in both to new businesses that are focusing on open data, but also to our government partners and others, evangelists who are interested in open data, and bringing those conversations together. We also see data as infrastructure at Thomson Reuters, and we're seeing that a number of other organizations and teams and groups are starting to take that on board and giving data itself investment as you would do for roads and bridges, for example. Because so much of our world now runs on data that needs to be treated as such as well.
Cool. Well, I want to thank our panel. Now, as you may guess, lunch will actually be in this room as well, and so you'll have an opportunity to continue the conversations. But right now, we're going to take a quick coffee break. But please, we want to start. We have a lot of stuff to cover today, so let's be back here by the hour so that we can pick up the program. But enjoy the coffee. Thank you. We are starting. So for those of you who woke up this morning to the headlines, of which there are many, and I think regardless of politics, of which persuasion you are, we all have to admit it's exciting to wake up in the morning to figure out what's been tweeted, what's been said, regardless of our own political persuasions. Life is interesting. It makes morning news very, very challenging. But one of the things that was mentioned this morning, which I found very interesting, a little headline off to the side, that China basically announced that they are going to own AI, artificial intelligence. And the Central Planning Committee has made this a major, major priority. And so if there was ever a wake-up call to see and understand the value of where we are going in this field, I don't think we have to look beyond our own borders of what's going to be happening. Every trend that I look at today suggests and screams at a better understanding of what is cognitive computing, what is artificial intelligence, but more importantly, what does it mean to us in society and to government? And we've got two excellent experts. Before I do that, I'm told that somebody left a phone, which I'm going to auction off in a few minutes. No, somebody left a phone by the coffee station. And so if anybody would like to claim it, you may. Okay. And we have a winner. We have a winner.
You're a beautiful dog, by the way.
Oh, my God.
It's amazing what one can learn on the home screen. Okay, so we have a really great panel, and I'm going to introduce both very briefly, and I'm going to ask each of you to say a little bit about yourselves and your connection to the topic so that we have a better understanding of the lens in which you see the issue. So we have Chris Godella, who is with IBM. He's an IBM Distinguished Engineer with the Government Cognitive Solutions. And then we have also the Honorable Anthony Cabiza, Montgomery County, Ohio. We have to always keep in mind there are a lot of Montgomery counties. You are well represented, just like I'm told there are 24 Franklin counties. But Franklin County, Ohio is #1 in size. Yes. There we are. So gentlemen, a little word about yourselves, and I'm going to sit down and let you take it from there.
Sure. Okay.
Start with you, sir.
Okay. Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Cadella. As Alan said, I work in our worldwide government group as the lead for cognitive computing. I've been spending my time working on Watson and cognitive computing for about the last 6-7 years. Before that, I was with IBM Research. I've been with IBM my whole career, which is long enough to have 2 kids now who work for IBM. So I guess I've redefined the word productivity.
And tuition assistance really helps. You've got great benefits there. Yes.
I'm Tony Capizzi. I'm a judge from Montgomery County, Ohio, which is about an hour and a half west of here. I don't work for IBM. I work for you. I'm a public servant. I'm a judge, and my exclusive jurisdiction is over juvenile court. I practiced law for 25 years, and I've been a judge for the last 13. I'm here to give you the reality check of what this means as a person who's working every day needing information. And so I know Chris is going to talk about more of a global perspective. I'll bring it back down to reality. Can I ask the question?
Yes.
Can I assume most of you are CIOs or in that category of your career for counties? All right. You're ready for us. Okay.
Okay. We judge you to be first? Yeah. Come on up, and there's a clicker. You're all set?
Okay. I'm all set. Thanks. Well, good morning again. So I'm going to start out by describing cognitive computing, just to get the definitions down so that we're all on the same page with this, and then talk about some use cases that we've seen in IBM, mostly in government, since that's where I spend most of my time, and hopefully get you thinking about use cases for cognitive computing in your own realm. Okay, so, and then I think we'll have some time at the end for questions. Okay.
No lunch.
No lunch. Okay. So first, a little bit of history. How many remember the IBM Jeopardy playing Watson from a few years ago? Yeah. So just a little history on this. That project started in our research division as what we call a grand challenge, and these are problems that our researchers take on all the time. and you don't hear about them. These are the only two that have really made a big splash in public consciousness. Back in the 90s, we had this Deep Blue supercomputer project that was the first ever to take on and beat an international grandmaster chess champion, Garry Kasparov. And at the time, we were unsure whether it was even possible. Okay, it had never been done before, and that's the essence of a grand challenge. And so in 2007, about 10 years ago now, we defined another grand challenge, which was to take computer understanding of human language to the next level. And so it was thought that, well, what better challenge would there be than to have a computer that could play Jeopardy? And it was considered a grand challenge at the time because not everybody thought it could even be done. In fact, we had an IBM research vice president who was dead set against investing in it because, it'll be embarrassing and, it can't really be done, and why should we do this and all that. So he was outvoted. We don't take these things on lightly, though, because we invest in such projects because we believe that it'll lead to the next stage of a given technology that we think is important to our customers. Now, if you think about it, however, it was even a bigger challenge than the chess challenge, because as challenging the chess game is, it's a confined problem. It's a computable problem because the board only has 64 squares and it's got a finite number of pieces and they're confined to move according to very strict rules. So that's what I mean by a computable problem. Whereas human language is contextual, it's fuzzy, we use metaphor, we use phrases, we have multiple languages. There's a seemingly infinite number of ways of saying the same thing. So computers are fundamentally ill-equipped to deal with natural language. They were built originally by mathematicians for mathematicians, and so it's the language of mathematics they understand. So as challenging as natural language is, Jeopardy is even more challenging if you're familiar with the game because it tries to be clever. The clues use metaphor, they use puns, humor. So that just made it even more challenging. So the team took about 4 years to come to the point where they were able to play it to the degree of beating former Jeopardy champions at the rate of about 70%. So it was not a given that it would even win when it got to TV, but they were pretty sure in a 2-game match it would win. So that's how the whole thing started, and we've developed this now over the last 6 years into what we call cognitive computing. And the reason why we are investing so heavily in this, and we really have invested billions of dollars over the past few years in this, is that we see it as a new era of computing, and there have been only 3. The one that spans the lifetime of everybody in this room is the programmable systems era. This sort of started around 1950-ish. And it's when we as an industry, stopped building a new computer for each problem and rather went to general purpose machines that could be programmed. That was a huge change. This new change to the cognitive era is an equally large change. And so what is cognitive computing exactly? Well, it is a brand of AI. Okay, I'm going to draw the distinction. If you have questions about that, I'll be glad to answer that too. But cognitive computing sort of has these 3 characteristics. First of all, there's understanding. So understanding in the way humans understand information. That's why there was this emphasis on natural language understanding. That's why it became such a hard problem. To interact with humans, to be able to make sense of large amounts of data that exists as unstructured text data, that is documents. Secondly, the ability to reason over that information. So make conclusions from that information, form hypothetical answers to questions about that information. And by the way, today it's more than just unstructured textual information, but it's information of all sorts. One of the other speakers earlier this morning was talking about natural language processing as one of the objectives there is to do automatic annotation of text documents. And that's part of the extraction of meaning from natural language. And then finally, these systems are learning. In fact, the behavior of cognitive systems at a high level, at the application layer, is primarily governed by what they've learned. So yes, there's still a lot of computer code in this stuff, make no mistake, but their behavior, their value is derived from this learning process. And they learn in multiple different ways. The primary way is by reading what you give them to read. There are other ways of applying machine learning to problems, especially when you go beyond text into things like image analysis and so forth. So cognitive compute, that's how we define cognitive computing. It's real, it's not sci-fi. And again, the reason why we're investing so heavily is we see it as a new era. And in fact, we don't see it as a point solution that you apply cognitive to this problem. It's going to pervade all use of IT, we assert, in the coming years and decades. Now, the other thing to understand about this brand of AI, or cognitive computing, is that it's by no means at all about replacing humans. Its primary focus is to make use of human expertise and even amplify human expertise. So there are certain things humans are good at, like you see on the left here, that computers can't do. So humans are very good at having insight, having intuition, learning from experience and so forth. Common sense, right, is a human concept. These are things computers can't do. So the emphasis in cognitive computing is to only do algorithmically that which can be done better algorithmically. And so it's the stuff on the right side. Things like determining relevance, looking for patterns, that sort of thing, and amplifying human abilities. So the objective here is to take a human expert and make them even better at what they do by providing them with an assistant or an advisor who can read 1 million documents, right, which a human can't do. So how is this different from other sorts of AI technologies? Well, one of them that you heard talked about a lot is rule-based expert systems. Now, the way that cognitive computing, and Watson in particular, differs from rule-based expert systems is those systems are written, the rules for such systems are written by experts who try to think about the entire problem space and get all of the possibilities together and, you know, the prime example here is medical diagnosis, right? Those things have gotten very good. But if you think about it, taking the medical diagnosis thing as an example, patients don't usually come in with one thing wrong with them. They have several things wrong with them. They're being treated for something already. So as soon as you throw in those combinatorics, the problem space just explodes. And so a probabilistic system like Watson, like cognitive systems, does better than static, rule-based expert systems. The second major difference here is the distinction between this question answering model and keyword search that we're all familiar with. Everybody does Google searches. So you think about it, and the way this works is you have a problem, you have a question, you go out to the web, you do a search on a couple of keywords, it gives you back documents or links to documents, and then you read them and you try to find what's relevant to your problem, and then maybe go back and change the words that are, your search is based on and find new documents. It's a very powerful way to find information on the messy internet with its low signal-to-noise ratio. So what we offer with these cognitive systems is a different way to find information. It's not a replacement for keyword search, but it's a different way to effectively and efficiently find relevant information. So you think about this model, and it's pretty different. You start with a natural language question. That's what NL means here. You start with a natural language question. You have a system that can understand the question, understand even different interpretations of the question, and then provide back answers, or hypothetical answers, hypotheses as we call them, along with evidence behind each answer, for and against each answer, and a score, a confidence score that's based on scoring evidence according to its relevance. And that's all given back to the decision maker or user to consider. So you're not getting back full documents, you're getting back answers, or you're getting back passages of evidence that are very relevant to the question that you asked. It's a completely different way of finding information. It's a way to navigate from what you know to what is knowable, but is hard to know because there's too much to read. Now, one of the striking differences that everybody can notice with these two ways of finding information is you've probably noticed when you go to Google and you type 2 keywords, you get a certain set of results. You add a third keyword, gets a little better. You add 4 maybe, it gets better. But you get up around 5 or 6 words and it just falls apart. Falls off a cliff and you either get nothing or nonsense. And that's distinctly different from these cognitive systems that understand questions, because it turns out the more information you give it as input in the question, the better it does at determining relevance and providing you with relevant information to consider. And again, a primary example is the medical diagnosis case, where the question is always the same: what's the diagnosis and what are the possible treatments? But along with that simple question comes the patient's record. So it's as if you asked a really long question, like what's the diagnosis for, 51-year-old male with elevated temperature, with blood pressure so-and-so, with, all as the input. So it's quite a different way of discovering information. So these systems then rely on large amounts of information. The more information, the better. As input, as a knowledge base, it all applies here. But it's important to consider the choice of information. So the choosing of what you give these systems to read and consider is paramount. It has to be, usable. It has to be trusted. It has to be not garbage, right? It's the old garbage in, garbage out kind of thing, kind of consideration. Now, the other thing to realize about these systems is they're not big monolithic black boxes. The original Watson system that played Jeopardy was, in fact, a collection of boxes that were actually black, about 9 of them. And, but it's no longer the case. We've now gotten better at this cognitive computing stuff, and we actually have decomposed that original system and added to it, to where now there's kind of an environment to apply in individual pieces. You can still build question answering systems also, but you can do more interesting things too, in addition, like sentiment analysis and personality analysis, language translation, language detection, image analytics, and so forth, as a kind of a constellation of pieces that can be put together in interesting ways. Now let me talk briefly about use cases that we've seen, primarily in public sector, over the last 6 years. They roughly boil down into these 5 categories. So starting from the left, there's a category, and by the way, as you hear these, you ought to be able to think about examples in your own realm. So exploration refers to the use case where it's more of a traditional activity that data scientists use or analysts use, not so much question answering. It's still about natural language and structured data, but in a UI environment where you can do visualization, you can look for patterns, similarities, differences, that sort of thing, extract coherent information from what may on the surface seem like an incoherent collection. The second one, called conversation, this is the one that you should think about in terms of a 311 sort of service. So it's a very confined knowledge base of information about, say, a company's products or a government agency services. And in this case, the precision of the answers is paramount. You want to take a question from, say, a citizen and give them the right answer the first time. Now, in reality, I've seen these things deployed at 2 levels. The first level is the simpler level of questions, say, direct from citizens, and then there's a tier above that for more complicated questions of law, say, or services, or questions about, your own case, say. And in that case, one of these systems becomes a consultant for a professional who's staffing a call center, say. Next is discovery. This is the biggest use case. This is the biggest scaled up use case because it could have the largest corpus of information that you give it to read. This is the use case also where maybe you don't know the starting question and you're not looking for a single answer. You're looking for multiple competing hypotheses. This is the use case that supports, for example, defense and intelligence analysts, which could be about anything from economics to world politics to you name it. This is also the use case that supports legal discovery for preparing court cases, for preparing legislation, and so forth. This is also the use case that supports, say, scholarly and academic research. So the idea is you build a Watson system that is an advisor, okay, or an assistant. And you'll notice whenever we talk about these larger Watson systems, it's always in terms of building an advisor or an assistant to a human, not a replacement. Next, so next is the category we call compare and comply. Think of this as any sort of problem situation where you've got a regulatory framework or a set of policy documents that you have to adhere to or best practices, and then you have a case, however you want to define case. And the problem for the Watson system is to look at that case and give a human being a tip-off as to where are the most relevant parts of that policy. And just as a quick example, we've had discussions with a municipal government, a large municipal government I can't name, but their interest was in can a Watson system be built that could ingest all of our building codes and make sense of it. And not only our municipal building codes, but the ones for our state, and provide an advisor to everyone from the homeowner who wants to put a deck on their home, say, up to the billion-dollar convention center developer, to help them through the process and so forth. That's an example of policy. And then finally, we have decision, and this is the use case where you've got a well-defined body of knowledge around the decision process. So think of the medical diagnosis use case as an example of that. There are many, many others in military, in decision-making for public safety, say, police. The idea here is you've got, as I said, a well-documented practice of decision-making that a Watson system can read, and then you have current conditions around which you have to make a decision. I'll give you one example in government real quick. We're in the middle of a project with NASA where they came to us and asked, can you build a Watson system that could be an advisor to the people who work in airlines operation centers to make decisions? And these are these centers that all the big airlines run. There are a couple hundred people. They have different specialties, and their job is to manage flights before, during, and after flights. And when they go looking for it, and most of these decisions are made on the fly from their experience, but every day they're confronted with something they haven't quite seen before, and they go looking for information. And when they do that, believe it or not, the way they do this today is they have a reference library. They look at an index, they pluck out a volume, they open a PDF file on one of their screens, and they do Control F. It's hugely inefficient and ineffective. So being able to ask a natural language question against that whole library would be a game changer for them. Okay? I'm almost done here, and where's it going next? So where it's going next is beyond text, to embrace the analysis of images, for example, and other multimedia data, to languages other than English, to structured data, and to maybe predictive models. And it all comes together with the objective of giving decision makers a rational set of alternatives to consider and the evidence behind each suggestion. Okay? So let me turn it over to the judge.
Cut yours off and put
Yep.
mine up.
Yours should be right here too. Let's see.
Chris, thank you.
Yes. Let's see.
Yeah, right there.
As we transition, Chris, there's something you said that I think is very reassuring. I don't know about you all, but I've been getting very nervous about Watson, thinking there's only one. And I thought, oh my God, this one beast is going to do it all.
Right.
And now I'm hearing finally Watson systems. It's like, oh God,
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, yeah.
Good. I'm reassured. Thanks.
Okay. Well, hi. I'm Tony Capizzi. As I said earlier, I'm a judge in Montgomery County. Chris and I are a good tag team, although it's the first time we've ever done this because he talks way over my head. You guys all understand him because you're CIOs. I'm a judge. I don't really care how you get it done. I just want you to get it done for me. I mean, that's the reality of what I do. I'm going to tell you one use case scenario and sort of go from there. And let me give you some background as to really where I am and what I'm doing. I'm in Ohio. I'm one of 88 counties in Ohio. Probably didn't know there were 88. We have about 540,000 people in my county. I have about 125,000 constituents, which are children. My population breakdown by race is 74% Caucasian, 21% person of color. I do about 23,000 cases a year. I have 23,000 cases a year for 11 judicial officers. A lot of work. In that, people think a juvenile court, frankly, just deals with little criminals, little delinquents, and the reality is juvenile courts around this state and many states are three different things. One, I'm that court where there are little criminals go. I would not call them that, but you would. Secondly, I have a court where 1,000 children are in my court who are there for no reason of their own. They've been abused, they've been neglected, they've been dependent. So they don't want to be there, but someone's abused them. And third, we're the new divorce court. Half the people who have children don't get married, and so on those issues of custody, child support, visitation, tax deduction, they come to me in my court to deal with it. And so I have a staff of 510 people. I'm going to show you this slide again. This is all give you a comparison as to what I do where I am. Excuse me. I've had pneumonia for 2 months, just getting over it. I show you this slide to show the number of kind of cases I have and to highlight two things. And this will relate to you in terms of dollars and cents, and I'll show you why. In 2013, look at the numbers of delinquency from 9,500, now 4 years later, basically 1,000 cases less. The reason that has happened, and I am a good predictor of how the economy is going to go, because the economy goes down in Montgomery County in Ohio in 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, the economy was in the dumps. And when the economy is in the dumps, children get abused, they get beaten, they get assaulted by their families. So that's why it went down, because now since 2013, Ohio and Montgomery County is in a boom. So as we're in a boom, more people work, and therefore less children get abused. And it goes all the way down. If you look at the systems, I can tell you that ahead of time. I can tell you when the economy gets better, my kids are safer. Economy goes bad, you're going to abuse your children. And that's a problem that I'm stuck dealing with. The complexity of our court is such that I don't have enough time to do all the work that I do. I run the largest juvenile treatment court, drug court in Ohio for children, in comparison to my population. Cuyahoga County, anyone here from Cuyahoga County? All right, one of the largest counties in the state, in Columbus, Ohio, with Franklin County, one of the largest in the state also, had millions plus people. I have 500,060 people in my jurisdiction. I have a similar number of kids in treatment court than they do, so it's the largest per capita. I have a lot of kids, and I need to keep them out of residential treatment because cost, and I'm always going to relate to costs here, because you're worried about what things cost in a county. If I send a child to residential treatment, it costs me $60,000 to $90,000 a year. If I have them in outpatient treatment, it costs me $3,000 a year. So my goal has to be to keep people out of treatment facilities. And so I have a treatment court. I started the family treatment court because of the opiate epidemic. Ohio, as you know, was at the forefront of the opiate problem in the United States. My county made a 3-day hit on the Today Show 3 weeks ago. Matt Lauer abused the heck out of Montgomery County as being the mega center of opiate problems in the United States. And stay tuned, because this week, CNN is going to do a review of my court and give a different version of what's absolutely happening. But I started the family treatment court because I needed to find a way to keep children in the homes of parents, even if the parents are addicted to opiates. And so we started that. And finally, what I'm starting next month is a life court, which is a mental health court for children. Because let me tell you this. You may not believe this, my numbers are the same all over the country. 65% of children, and I don't care if your kid's in trouble or not, or your grandchild, 65% of children in the United States have an alcohol or drug problem. Another 15% have a mental health problem, so they self-medicate because they're not getting the appropriate medications themselves. So in reality, and I know I get this dark image here, but it's the reality of life. 80% of our children either have an alcohol problem, drug problem, or mental health problem. And so when I talk in high schools, I say to those kids, if you're not the one using drugs or alcohol, then they're both using. That's the reality of life. And nobody wants to say it's my child or my grandchild. And so I run these courts, and they're complicated. And so I get information, or I need information from probation officers, mental health providers, school providers, police department, I think I said education. Every sector of the community needs to give me information for me to make my best decision. And so a year ago, I met with the Watson Care team, and they had been very, and I know Chris talks about 6 years ago, they are very deep into the medical field at this point and doing some amazing analysis, and Watson's doing this great work in the medical field. And for the legal field, we're at the tip of the iceberg. But it's really exciting. And that is what I call the dashboard, because I needed information. And so for a year ago, when I met with the Watson Care team, they were in the business of trying to get into the legal profession. I wanted it. And I happen to be the only court in the United States of America that's using Watson in a juvenile system for specialty courts. And so I'm the guinea pig. I'm the model. I'm the intellectual property, because I helped design all this with them because I needed information at the tip of my fingers that I don't have time to look to file after file after file. And frankly, this is going to sound scary if you're not on the bench. Excuse me. But people think I spend hours on each case with a child. I can't. I'm doing 35 cases a day. That's a day. I'm supposed to spend, don't get scared, 5 to 7 minutes per case. And that's it. And if I'm spending 3.5 minutes of that 7 minutes looking through paperwork, I'm not doing what's best for that family and that child. And let me tell you this. Specialty courts is what this is the focus on. We're complicated courts. I don't see a child 3 times. In a normal case, even an adult case, you see the person when they're charged, you see them when they're a plea, you see them when you sentence them. In specialty courts, be it veterans courts for adults, DUI courts, mental health courts, my type of courts, I see that child and that family potentially for 2 or 3 years in a row, every week or every 2 weeks. And so I may get to know them, but the information overload to a judge is just, it's an overload. And so when we designed this, there are key factors I wanted on my screen. So when I look at that screen, I know exactly what I'm going to do talking to that child. I want to know, in particular, give me a summary, the last touch point. And let me describe it this way. Everybody's got to give me information. And this is all in real time. And so I used to get written reports that would be 10 or 12 pages long. Because my treatment court's on Thursday, and I was there all day yesterday, so my voice is going too. Excuse me. I get the written reports on Tuesday afternoon. I spend a half day Wednesday getting ready, reading them all, and I start Thursday morning. Well, I will tell you, in the lives of the people we deal with, a lot happens between Tuesday at 4 o'clock and Thursday morning. So in real time, my probation officers, mental health providers can go into the cloud and give me information, because one of the key things I wanted was a touch point. Latest touch point. When's the last time someone talked to this family or that child? So was it at 4 o'clock 3 hours ago? Was it 10 minutes ago in the hallway? And I'm on the bench, the probation officer outside the courtroom can say, Judge, I just found out 20 minutes ago, mother beat the hell out of him. And I would not normally know that, or we'd have a break in the courtroom, do a sidebar, and get that information. It's there for me. I wanted UA results, drug test results. On the screen, I see the last 5 times the child or adult's been tested. If I want more information, there's a little button I click next to it, and that gives me all the results. Because again, I see these kids for 18 months, 2 years, I can't remember. I wanted to know, when did I give them a positive incentive? When did I punish them? What did I do? All these issues are important to me. I wanted to know everybody on my care team. Is there a teacher involved? Is there a mental health provider? Is there a probation officer? And all that stuff's on the left side. And I have the pictures. And so we're able to take all this information and make my job quicker, make the probation officer's job quicker, and in the end, more cost effective. And you as CIOs got to understand, I'm probably better speaking to county administrators and county commissioners, because I'm going in there fighting for dollars and cents just to find my budget and saying, you know what, my budget can stay level if I use this system because I need less people, potentially. Or I do a better job with the children and families that I can serve. And so there's There's a benefit to the community who's seeing this in action. My morale is substantially higher because they can, any time of day, go into the cloud, put their information in, and I can see it. The family gets more time with me, with the judicial officer on the bench. And so when this was designed, it's a joke now. I think I'm a joke somewhere through Watson because I said, I want 1 click, 2 click. And that means 1 click to the child, 2 clicks to get to the next child because I don't have time to waste. And so I would say to you, people get afraid of, and judges especially get afraid of the concept of artificial intelligence. And Watson's going to tell me what to do. And to me, it's augmenting the intelligence I already have. It's giving me more information to make a better decision in a smaller amount of time. And let me give you one sort of example, not on my court, out of California, where they're using it, and those of you that are in the Dallas sense, using this for foster care placement. You have a child in a family, you got to remove a child from placement. Most foster care placements are a disaster. But if you have a system that can look at the child, look at the family, analyze their social background, racial background, economic background, school background, where do they live, what kind of mental health providers would best serve them, all those criteria. What Watson will do, it'll give me, Judge, these are the 7 or 9 best locations this child probably should go. You still get to pick which one it is. In my case, I put all this information in, we will be able to. And when I said we're in the beginning stages of this, in reality, Watson helps me today because I can do all this now from the bench. But it's not helping me yet predict what I should do in a year from now. Because it does, you got to fill it with information. And we're the first in the United States. I think Ohio will be the first state in the United States that has this statewide. And as you put more information into it, it'll better be able to give me some predictive analysis as to what I maybe should do. And so a year from now, my expectation is it's going to say to me, Judge, with this child and this family and this scenario, the treatment provider that will best serve the needs of that child is this one that maybe is 12 miles away versus the one for convenience that's 5 miles away. Everybody looks for the closest one, but it may not be the best one. And the ability is to analyze all these different areas and then give me information. The other side of this for the common pleas court judges and for myself, I'm going to be speaking in another panel in 20 minutes on a major case in Ohio from the Supreme Court that I wrote the original decision 3 years ago. And I just yesterday, and I have to show, I just issued my final decision yesterday. I've issued many decisions 3 years ago, but I just issued a decision yesterday because it's the highest profile case in Montgomery County in many, many years. Went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court actually reversed the decision to go back and do what I said was the right decision 3 years ago, which is extremely rare. And I issued my written decision yesterday, which made the Dayton Daily News today. Headlines. Lawyers, judges, I got to read 57 or 5,700 law review articles. I can't do that. I simply don't have the time or the energy to do that. And so Watson can, through the keyword and through the search system, I can put in 3 words or put in a paragraph, and it can look at all those 57,000 law journals and tell me, Judge, these are the 10 maybe you need to read. And that's what it does to save time, to save the fact that I just don't have it. And my role is not to be a statistician. So when I go to my county commissioners or I go to my county administrator, my vantage point is, you want me to do my job better? This is the way to make it more efficient for everybody, and I can do a better job. That's the reality of what we do. I have really high expectation that a year from now, Watson can help me do a better job of helping the families and children that we serve. And theoretically, if I do a better job for children then they won't be in jail when they're 18, 19, 20, and 21. And finally, if you see the story on CNN this week, they're going to highlight a parent whose son OD'd, I believe it was in December of 16. And then they're going to interview two young women in my court, actually 2 young women and a man, who are successfully going through the program of heroin addiction. My job is to keep children alive. I'm going to repeat that. My job is to keep them alive till they're 18, 19, or 20. And so if there's any tool out there that can help me keep a child alive longer, when I went to the young, and I referred CNN to this gentleman because I try to go to every funeral of a child in my court. The sad reality is now in 13 years, I've been to 15 funerals. And I went to this young man's funeral last winter. Excuse me. And I stood next to the casket with his father. And his father said, "Judge, thank you for what you did." And I said, what did I do? He's dead. And his dad said, "Judge, you gave him 4 more years of his life. Because when you had him, he was 16. And you taught him enough to keep him from dying until he turned 20. And, that hits home. And so when I'm up here sort of preaching a little about what I do and what judges do all over the country, if there's any tool that can make me save that child's life, I'm going to investigate it and hopefully use it. And so with that, I'm going to end my presentation. There actually are 4 slides here. Only the difference in the slides is to show afterwards I can dig down into different areas. And so I really think the key point is the first slide shows everything I need. That's my dashboard. And if I click on any one area, I can get information such as this, because this gives me the full treatment plan for that child. And so it's a lot more complicated than one slide, but the reality is that one slide leads me to all the information that's necessary. And I'm going to end at that. And for both of us, we're open for questions. Or maybe we're not. Alan's in charge. I'm sorry.
No, we have time for questions before you run off and do this again. Preserve your voice as you need to. That was very powerful.
I wish it was the same one.
And for 2 guys who didn't rehearse, I thought that was pretty powerful and pretty dramatic.
Thank you.
So questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you very much for your talking, and I really appreciate it. So Holly Hartel from Arlington County, Virginia. My role is as a business relationship manager to work with the different departments and understand what they're trying to do. What I'm curious is the beginning of the evolution of what is clearly an innovative solution. What was the role that the CIO or the technology department played in coming up with this? Did you identify the problem? Did they come to you with Watson? How did that happen?
Judge?
Thank you.
It's really for you, I think.
Well, I'm sorry. I thought you said what role did the CIO do? What was?
Well, who was the technical person who worked with you to get to the point?
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. You're right. I went to my IT staff, my CIO, and said, I went to a meeting with Watson. This is a great idea. Let's make it work. And then the biggest problem we had, which we solved, of course IBM solved it, I didn't do it. I will tell you this, my CIO group is small, and Watson, IBM can bring in 5 kids that look like they're my grandchildren, and they're a lot smarter than all of us. And so our biggest problem was that we had all these different systems, and nobody wanted to input twice to their system and my system. So it was making sure all the systems could talk properly. And again, I don't speak in your language. So all the systems, be it wherever they are, had to be able to have direct input into my Watson system so that they only input once, because they will not do it. My mental health provider will not put in their system in mine. So everything had to flow into Watson. And so we spent the last year, actually 8 months, that part was having Watson create the solution to have easy dropping into my system. But yeah, I actually went through my CIO, and from there, when I go to all my meetings with Watson, he is with me. Yes. Thank you.
Chris, do you have any comments about the entry points that you see when working with local government?
Well, it's very commonly a partnership between people working the business side of things and people working the IT side. I mean, that's the way it should be. And figuring out what the problem is first, and then figuring out what the use case is and what components to add. I mean, I'll give you just one thing to think about. There's a thought experiment I recommend people do when thinking about this cognitive stuff, and that is to imagine how your job, or in the case of a CIO shop, how your customers' jobs would change if you had at your disposal a room full of assistants who could all read 1 million documents, remember every sentence perfectly, and not so much become experts, but at least be able to point you at a paragraph after you ask them a question, the most relevant paragraph to what you're asking. That's one kind of thought experiment you could do. Another is to say, if you're a decision maker and you are under a time constraint, I don't care if it's minutes or weeks or whatever, imagine how your job would change if you could press the pause button on the world and go off to your office and do some research and come back with the perfect conclusions, press the play button, and now you're a genius. Both of those are kind of cartoonish, but they get you thinking about what could possibly be use cases as an advisor or assistant.
Great. Other questions? Yes.
How did you get to Watson? Because I can't see my common pleas judges saying, I'm going to get to IBM, and maybe that Watson thing can help me.
Okay. I'm pretty inquisitive. I'm also president of the National Juvenile and Family Court Judges Association. And I train a lot around the country, and I go to a lot of meetings. And I was asked to join a board 2 years ago called Stewards for Change. And so I go to a lot of techie meetings. And so I went to a techie meeting at Johns Hopkins because I serve on the board. And when I was there 2 years ago, I saw the Watson presentation about healthcare. And I'm like, wow, let's convert that. And believe me, they're way in front of me. But I knew it's what I needed. And so I now am preaching to the choir around the country. I'm talking to judges. So the way to get to your judge is me. Because I'm speaking all over the country now. And again, no disrespect to IBM. I'm not talking about IBM. I'm talking about cognitive capability computing, whoever it may be. I mean, there are competitors in the world. I'm just saying the needs are there, and I'm telling judges, you're wasting your time, you're spending too much time. Frankly, you have too many employees doing all this research for you, and if I can help you do it better, more efficiently, I'm the preacher. And I'm not paid by IBM at all. It's a joke because when I teach around the country, not for a company, they fly me in, and I teach like 25 times a year, fly me in, pay my bills, pay my food, all this stuff, then I go home. IBM is so conscious of this, and I respect them for that. They're like, Judge, you're government. We cannot do a thing for you. And so, again, I'm not here preaching for IBM. I'm preaching that there's a need out there. And I will tell judges the need is there.
So one of the great advantages of coming to a meeting like NACo or PTI is to hear these kind of solutions and how people did it. You all can be heroes that are CIOs. Go back, talk to the folks that would be very interested in this. You now have somebody that you can talk to through your association and as well as IBM. And that's the value to me. And I get so angry when I hear folks from counties and cities, we can't travel to these events. And I say, how do you get your information? Well, we see in the newspapers, whatever. Anyway, Sonny, you have a question.
Can I ask a question to you?
Yes.
We were late in giving you our presentations, but now that you have them, I'm assuming there's a website for everybody. Can these be put on the website?
It is our goal as normal. We take everyone that is given to us and we will post it. So I know people are taking pictures for that immediate feedback, but we will make all the presentations available.
Yeah, the very last page of mine has my contact information. You need to reach me.
Perfect. Sonny.
Thank you. Yeah, this is very insightful.
Yeah.
Two questions, please. One for Judge Capizzi. Do you think it is applicable, what you have done is applicable to courts throughout the country?
Absolutely. We designed it. I believe my court is using the best practice model for the United States. So frankly, we built the best model that there is with all the experience we have. And so I've shown it to a number of judges around the country, and they believe it's the best model. Now, one key point to it, which again makes me sound like I'm a preacher here, It's built so it can be modified to your specific need in the specific court in a specific state. So the way we've designed it, it will work in any specialty court and then eventually in every kind of court. But it works best in all the specialty courts around the country. And yes, it's adaptable and modifiable in every way.
And one follow-on question, if I may. Chris, is this going to be available as a service?
Well, yeah, it's primarily available as a service.
And so how is data handled? In other words,
well, it depends on the requirements. So it's provided, the most economical way is as a service. Things run in an IBM data center. If there's a specific concern about privacy or secrecy, that's handled somewhat differently.
And we had that issue. Of course, courts information is extremely private. Yeah. Medical information is extremely private. So we've worked that through. My Chief Justice in Ohio has been working with me on this to get it statewide. And a bigger issue is that, and you'll all appreciate this, as county office holders or appointed, every document, every email, everything you touch is public information. And the question was, can all my stuff be private versus public, even though we're the court? And the reality is we can segregate what's private. Medical records, all that kind of stuff is private. So that's been built into the system that we can have limited access to different people.
All right, I was hoping we have to start moving this way. This side's been very quiet with questions, yes. So we'll start with you, Chris.
This question is...
It's on.
It's on.
This question is for the judge.
Yes, sir.
I really, first of all, I love your energy and passion. My question is this: have you been able to demonstrate any metrics around a reduction in the overall cost of administration of justice as a result of adoption? Is that something that you're still working towards?
To be honest, I think we're still working towards it. I can give you the anecdotal stories that it is working. My staff's doing better. My staff's managing the same number of cases frankly, with less staff. It's more efficiently being done. But I think we're a year away from proving that. But I've shown to my county commissioners, I went to the Supreme Court and said, I'm going to do this. Can you give me some help to do it? And they gave me a technology grant to help me start it. But we're in it deep. And I think I can tell you it's going to make a difference financially. I can't give you the matrix yet, but we're very close.
Question over here. Giving you guys a chance over here on this.
Actually, I had a question. The slide that you had of the young lady, I guess the dashboard and all her touch points with the system.
Sure.
It was very powerful to read. It maybe even depressing too, but so who has access to that? Do her parents have access to that, or is it only you?
Well, let me be blunt. First of all, this is a fictitious person, but everybody I can limit who has access to different parts of it. And so as an educator, if someone's school system inputting, they can just put in what they want. So the only people that can really see this whole dashboard is myself and the chief probation officer. And everything else is really divided up with access limitations. So yeah, but no, when we've changed the name to protect the innocent, but this is what it will look like. And all this information is exactly from her. This is exactly, the only thing different in this is the name. And so believe me, it's pretty amazing, the information that I have. And so we clearly need to limit information to certain people. So the mental health providers only see the mental health stuff. And really, they don't input. They only input. I analyze, and eventually Watson will help me come with a solution. Did I answer your question?
Any other? We have time for one more question.
Yeah, and I got a jog over there.
The presentation of this has really got a lot of cool data collection and data presentation, but what's the, and maybe you're just not there yet, what's the cognitive aspect of this application?
Of his.
Well, I think it's taking in mega amounts of data and then using the history of 1 million cases to then tell me, in this particular case, with let's say 17 variables, this is maybe what your best solution may be.
But you're not doing that today. That's tomorrow, right?
Right. Correct. We're not doing that yet today, but they're doing it in The medical field. Yeah, but they're not doing it in the legal field yet. But I mean, someone's got to be the guinea pig, and that's me. And I believe, I mean, I've heard and seen these stories about how it's working in the medical field. I know it can work in my field. It's just getting there in a year from now.
And what they've got already that exemplify aspects of cognitive computing is the natural language understanding, the reasoning over that to find relevance, okay, and maybe some machine learning. I'm not familiar with their application exactly, but that's what's cognitive about it.
It is true that if I put in 7 key words, it will go through all that stuff. I don't understand. I mean, that's where I'm not in the same language as you guys. It does all that now.
Yeah. But as a closing thought, first of all, this was a great panel. I mean, just inspiring. And I'm sure many of you went in your minds, like me, were thinking even beyond the court system, where we have other areas that we may be more familiar and say, wow, this could work there too. And I think that's where, again, settings like this, we can, I think where there is a concentration of interest is where this begins, because then we can leverage each other's needs in a way that we can identify not only this, but other areas where we could come together and start building and start maybe partnering for similar solutions that have the same kind of results using this kind of technology, which I think is terrific. So, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
So you all have 3 minutes to grab coffee, take a stretch before we begin the next session. We're going to start. Please, everybody take their seats. As you can see, we have a real aggressive agenda, a lot of great sessions. The ones we've had this morning up to this point have been fantastic. That puts pressure on our next panel, which will be equally fantastic. So I'm kind of excited. I do want to say, again, that we have our tech standing committee meeting tomorrow, and you can look that up. You are invited to that because a lot of things that may be on your mind is worth sharing with others in terms of setting the direction. We would love to have our technology program be more than appears at our 2 meetings a year that we do with NACo. We'd love to have an ongoing thing. What webinars, what topics are we not covering that you'd like us to see? Are you ready to be a speaker and share some of the things that you have done? Is it something that you would like to highlight within your county that we could help you with? So we have a list of things that we're going to discuss tomorrow at the committee meeting. The same thing is true with our GIS subcommittee, another great opportunity to get involved and help shape the course of an ongoing program so that this culminates things, doesn't begin things, so we have an ongoing program. We're now going to talk about the data-driven justice, how to leverage county data to reduce recidivism and improve access to health benefits. Now, when this began, this was basically a White House initiative. Now NACo has taken over the leadership this with help from the Arnold Foundation, and helping us along the way has been Esri. And you know, early on, everyone was looking at data and looking at data, but they couldn't see it. They couldn't see the data because it really wasn't linking to GIS the way it's starting to now. This is the link that enables us not to just understand data, but truly see it, because when you can visualize things, much greater policy and action can take place. So we're going to talk about this. We have 3 panelists that each have a different perspective, but our first speaker is going to be Kathy Morris. For those of you who have followed her career, I met her about 10 years ago when you were with Cook County. Now has same position with Beaver County in Texas. Bear County, Beaver, sorry, wrong animal.
I thought you were saying Bexar.
I don't have my reading glasses, so it was B. I came close. So Camel County, Texas. No, Bear County. We're going to let you go first, and then we're going to go with Philip, who is Esri's Industry Partners team lead on this, on the public safety side. And then we're going to talk to, there's been a change. We have John Stevenson with Amazon Web Services. Now, you know, we always hear about them, this big giant in the room, and they are here, but they are also in data-driven justice. So it'll be very interesting to see their perspective. But I would like to start by just saying the lens in which you see things. So let's go that, and then we'll go to you, Kathy.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And the GIS subcommittee is at 7:30 a.m., so please join us.
Okay.
So again, I'm from Bear County. It's in San Antonio, Texas is the city seat. And Bear County is about 1,200 square miles. It's one of the fastest growing counties in the United States and also in Texas because we have more land mass. The city of San Antonio is not annexing Bear County. And unlike when I was in Cook County is a home rule county, in which when the 17 county commissioners come together, they can levy a new tax. And some of you probably, seen that in the newspaper. Well, it's different in Texas, as Chris from, Tarrant County can attest to. We're counties that can't levy a tax. We can only go to the legislature every other year and try to proxy for it. Our tax rate's half the city. The reason why I'm telling you all this is I'm level setting you to understand when we went for data-driven analytics, the other issue we have. We talked earlier today, and I'm kind of going to encapsulate from previous speakers how we address this issue. And I mean, I just want to say again, the judges, I mean, I still have goosebumps. It resonates so well. And for us CIOs in the room, that's why we became CIOs for local government. As my first boss in Cook County, the beloved John Stroger said, Kathy, we are the safety net for people. If there's no county government, we were here before the cities. This is where the rubber hits the road with us. So that when I became the CIO for Cook County at my mid-30s, and now, many years later, it really resonated with me. So this data-driven analytics and me becoming more gray and understanding and working in not only county government for 18 years, but I've been in really the public, the private sector. I worked for oil and gas, and I worked for Microsoft. And when I came to Bexar County, the initial project was part of this data-driven analytics. We had a big issue. Again, half a tax rate. We didn't have a lot for general fund monies, but we had a blue ribbon committee, and that's where I'm not the one saying no. I was never the one saying I need your data. It started with the top. We have a very, very vocal and very good commissioners court from Judge Nelson Wolf and the commissioners who saw this problem early on with a county growing exponentially and a really low general fund. And we had a jail at the brink of the state telling us, Bexar County, you need to build another $350 million jail. And what that meant was if we had to build another jail, we couldn't do any programs. We had to cut dramatically other services. So Judge Wolf and the commissioners put together this committee, and I first kind of came into the county, and everyone's like, what do we do? Do we add more clerks? How do we get this information? And as a judge before us said, and I kind of surveyed the areas, and I said to them, well, we don't really have money to build a monolithic data warehouse, but we have a legacy system that we need to make relational. Because when I first walked in, we tried to go to a new system. Our vendor went bankrupt. That was another problem we had. And again, CIOs are problem solvers. That's what we had to do. So what I thought about was, well, we have this tool. I kind of won't name the tools, but we have a legacy system that's a flat file, as Chris alluded, how do we make that relational? Well, I found a tool that allowed us to create these connections to our legacy data. And our legacy data had all of our jail, court, juvenile information, had all of our layers of data. And then I was able to make them all relational, put them in a relational database. Why? Because we all know then I could connect the dots. So I had a very good partner in this. Not only did I have management's, backing, they created a judicial services area. We're really kind of on the map for this. We had the judicial services department partner with us. They had the data analysts. They were like the functional people that went to the departments along with my business analysts. So in a room as a central CIO, we had the data sitting in our private cloud, and some of it was in other clouds. But our business analysts with judicial services mapped the data. Again, as Curtis said earlier, we can't start so high when you don't have your digital transformation. If your data is still sitting in paper, how do you track it? Well, we had to enhance our legacy system. That's the only system we had that did the case management across the entire enterprise. So I had very long-tenured employees who were the experts, who built the data dictionaries, who helped the functional users understand the workflows. So once we started from the bottom, again, we didn't have any money. It was my people, it was other employees, and it was other tool sets we already owned that we used. So I'm not saying we bought $2 million data warehouse. We had to start with a business problem. So once we got people in a room, they looked at me like, Kathy, what are you talking about? I had to then sell dashboards. I took this relational database. I was able to train a few of my programmers, and we built these dashboards built on business processes that we went and we married all these meetings together. So I just didn't have the court people in a room. I had the court people, I had the jail people, I had pretrial people, I had a myriad of different people sitting there for this problem of how do we lower the jail population. It wasn't just the court. It was, from there we piloted the public defender. We didn't have a public defender office at that time. We had court-appointed attorneys. Well, why am I putting a court-appointed attorney at the first court session? Because initially, that's a 10-day continuance. I'm keeping that detainee in the jail for 10 more days, then maybe he or she doesn't have to be. So as we looked and we had this data come to life in these dashboards, we were able to build dockets because these clerks were telling us it was taking them 10 hours a day to build a docket for the next day. Well, that's ludicrous, right? They were always behind, and we had people sitting in jail that were 125 days just waiting for a court appearance. They were sitting there 3 meals a day, $60 to $80 a day to feed them, clothe them, give them services. So once we started looking at that, and we would offer these dashboards that created these specialty court dockets. So for the veterans, the clerks would tell us the rules they had when they looked at the legacy data, and they would actually tell us, well, okay, if it's a veteran, and maybe it's a misdemeanor, and if then. They were telling us really verbally, my business analyst put this in Visio, and my programmer then built these dashboards, and we fine-tuned them with the group. And after a while, we were building dockets in a matter of minutes. So at 8 o'clock when they would come in, they had the docket for the courts. They had their dockets. And then, as the judge said, the judges were like, well, I want to really, zero in on certain. So we hyperlinked what they wanted on page 1. If they wanted all the court information or the images of the documents, we just hyperlinked all that, and they would go in, drill in as much as they wanted. So based on that first series of dashboards, again, across the enterprise, it wasn't just courts. It wasn't just adult probation, jail. It was John Doe and Jane Doe across the domain, because we're central, the central CIOs understand that. It wasn't a fight there was no fights in the meetings about, that's my data. We were all looking at the challenges of reducing jail population. So if you get out of the context of, let's talk about who owns data. I mean, I did that when I first went into Cook County. I had people taking servers and putting it under their desks. I'm like, and what is that proving? This is my data. And then when the cleaning lady used to unhook the server and vacuum, they would call me and say, oh, my data's gone. No, look at the cleaning lady. Is she vacuuming? Yes. Well, put it in my data center, you won't have that issue. 20 years later, I didn't want to talk about, it's my data, what's our business problem? We're all in this together. This is county government. This isn't, I don't work for, one department. I kind of made it rah-rah. We're all in this together. So after we built those series and we were able to reduce, we had some really good outcomes. We reduced jail population from 25 to 1,200 individuals. And again, we're growing exponentially. So we were seeing the jail pop going from 4,600 to 3,500, even though our population did a really, jump exponentially. We're getting about 30,000 new people coming into Bear County every quarter. That's how much we're growing. So to stabilize that, even though we're seeing felonies jump 50+%, we're able to stem that. And because we didn't have the tax rate, we couldn't keep hiring, more and more clerks. So you see how it all had to kind of blend together. And then we had programs, and then we said, okay, let's leverage other programs we have. So we did the first digital library, because we couldn't afford building $10 million, $20 million libraries. So we did this bibliotech library, but part of the library was doing programs to become a digital person. So before they're leaving our jail, we're like, why don't you get training on Word to do your resume? So that was all free programs with our reentry or our reentry folks from the jail that also worked. What my issue was, I wanted to give everyone that information, regardless of what department they were in, to know what we could offer. So by reducing the jail pop, 1,200 people, that saved us millions and millions of dollars that then pretrial and judicial services, Mike Lozito's ahead of it, he could then get grants married with our money and go to the Center for Healthcare Services and then get more health, mental health services for those, instead of us being the warehousemen for mental health. Judge Wolf and the commissioners, they don't want, if you're mentally ill and you have serious drug issues, the jail is the last place you should be. They keep preaching that. They need to have monies to go and get programs for these folks and bring them back into Bexar County, because if they're back working in Bexar County, they're paying taxes. So ultimately, we want people. We only want violent offenders in our jail. We don't want the mentally ill. And the same with our juvenile side. We have Judge Sakai, who has the same passion as the judge we just heard. And the more I talk to these folks, and having judicial services be that functional, so they are the ones really clearing the way for IT. I don't have to be there and really be that I need your data. Really, we don't talk about data. We talk about outcomes and processes and how to digitize this. So it's really been not only a money saver, but I think more people are going through the system more efficiently and effectively. This data-driven justice initiative, I think we're walking, we're walking the walk. We're really understanding it. And I feel like a business partner. I don't feel like, I'm not Dr. No. I don't want to say no. I know how passionate our elected officials and our department heads are. I know when they come to me, and it's gut-wrenching. The stories that the previous judge talked about, I would hear that all the time. And how can we, and I never said I don't have the money for it. I can't. You just have to really figure out what you already own and leverage it. So that's what we're doing now. So now, when the mentally ill, we send them to programs, but they're getting these programs, we lose sight of them. But again, we don't want the recidivism. So now we have a different initiative with Alamo City initiative with the hospitals, because the hospitals, what's the most expensive cost for them when these folks go to the ER? So they don't want us, they want to help us kind of frame out where when they leave our jail, we don't have any sanctions on them. But we want them to go to get help and keep getting help and get a job. And we have these other programs doing that. So we want now a 360-degree. So that's what we're working on in the Alamo City initiative, is getting all those working partners together and really talk about how do we now get a 360 view of John Doe as he goes to the broader society, because we really don't want to see him back in the jail. And so we use these dashboards that, again, we already own the software. That was free. And then we use SAS. We already had SAS, but that was a more that's for trending. But now we build dashboards for everything. So now I didn't want people to build their own Excel worksheet because it's in their hard drive. I want it on a dashboard because it's real-time data. And coming from an accounting background, I knew that was important because these things change so much. You want real-time data, you want to make this legacy data alive, and you want to drill down when people want it. So that's what we've been able to do at Bexar County. And again, it really starts with the leadership of the county. And we, as the IT people and the long-tenured employees, we built the data dictionary because we wanted to have a common language across all the areas, and we had to enhance our legacy system on the county mainframe. That mainframe, it still pumps out 100 million plus transactions a month, and until we get a new system, I couldn't keep saying, wait till the new system. We'll give you an answer with a new system. I couldn't say that. When I first walked into Bexar County, I said, well, let's see what we can do, and then we integrate with other applications to give a view within the county. So that's kind of my background.
Well, you absolutely set the stage. And as I mentioned earlier, this was a White House initiative. Now NACo has taken the lead in this. But you used the word, it required somebody from above to kind of say, we want this to happen. And I would also add to the word vision. to be able to say visualize, and I think that's a perfect segue into Philip. Do you have PowerPoints or? Okay. This is a polite way for me to sit down now, too. This is good. So come on up.
My name is Philip Melke, and I'm really happy to not only present for you, but to actually be here. This is a bit of a homecoming of sorts for me. I first started in GIS working for Montgomery County and the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission. One of the main efforts there, and also in Clark County, neighboring really the county that's between Montgomery County and here, Springfield, Ohio, gave me the opportunity to start to cut my teeth on crime analysis and really start to get interested in GIS. And it was an opportunity for me that, this is a great place to grow, and then I received the chance to be able to take a job out where GIS comes from in Redlands, California, southern. It's the tip of the urban sprawl of LA. I didn't know what to expect with Southern California to begin with, and then I didn't exactly know what my job was. It was described to me working this National Institute of Justice grant-funded crime analysis regional data initiative, where we were trying to combine 9 different jurisdictions of data into one common place and actually share that data with the public in one of the first crime mapping applications. Sounds fantastic. Little did I realize my actual job was to get yelled at by police chiefs in all of these different jurisdictions. So I empathize as far as the feeling of, that's my data. That's my data scenario is very prevalent in law enforcement. And what I would submit to you is that this is also an issue when we're facing health crises and challenges as well within health and human services. In fact, the wave of transparency that occurred within law enforcement, I'd suggest right around 2000 to 2010, I think is happening now with health and human services organizations. CJIS compliance was the concern before, HIPAA compliance is the concern now. So how do we actually work together on this to be on the same page? Now, I after getting the chance to do that project, I actually became a CIO myself for the city of Redlands, and I've had my data warehouse flooded twice. All the scars and little shock marks that are involved with being a CIO as well too, and then joined Esri 5 years ago as my longer term intent and dream. And so in this case, it's a honor to share with you some of the things and the progress that we've been making here in this case towards being able to achieve the objectives of the Data-Driven Justice Initiative. And those objectives were first to use data to identify and proactively break the cycle of incarceration. This is one of those where frequent flyers was the term that I always heard. You'd end up with, I did a lot of ride-alongs and found myself recognizing people that were being picked up on a regular basis, 3 hots and a cot. It's a chance for them to, be able to, I think in some cases, have some attention paid to them around some of these issues. A lot of cases, these were folks that just had mental health problems, and they exhausted police that were running from thing to thing, problem to problem, that you'd never know quite what to expect. And the scenario of mental health in this case always plays the wild card into what's going to happen in this particular engagement, this interaction. And so the tool, the other objective is to equip law enforcement and first responders with the tools that they need to respond and ultimately divert. We don't want to arrest everybody. We don't want to arrest our way out of a problem. In this case, what we want to be able to do is actually set them on the right path, and that frequently involves bringing resources that come to bear that law enforcement is not in charge of, and actually coordinating those kinds of resources and being able to ensure that we're able to connect people that have these needs in the right place and not just arrest them again. And then to use data-driven, validated pretrial risk assessment tools to inform pretrial release decisions. I believe, and I think a lot of others do, that geography is an excellent context to help us to understand information and the relationships and the silos of data that occur within all of these departments. right now it's easier to see what your kid had for breakfast on Instagram than it is to find out important information from one system to the next. And we want to mitigate that with a variety of different ways, data sharing agreements and methods of being able to connect portals of information. So in the case of the push towards police transparency, and what was felt and what I felt and experienced during that time working on this East Valley Compass initiative is that there is a crisis of confidence in police in many places, many communities in the United States, and sometimes for reasons that are valid, that require attention, that require transparency, that require your roles as CIOs to understand how to actually partner with the public, how to share information with the public, the right amount of information, and the right kind of way. It's not going to end, and what we need to be able to do is not only find ways of being able to share information with the public, but also share information with each other. And so some of the existing trends and why this ends up happening is that people are going to get this information one way or the other. You know, they're going to draw their own lines, they're going to create their own narratives. And for you to be able to own how data gets represented and how it gets utilized in order to drive policy decisions is ultimately one of the major goals, I think, of open data and sharing information with the public and sharing information with other agencies. I found in order to just comply with the Freedom of Information Act requests that we were getting actually took 30% of our staff time of 3 people. And so to lower the cost that's associated with being able to just run an information shop, and also, also to effectively make it easier to build those relationships with the public as well too. And there are tools that can help to do this. Open data tools that, being able to share your information in a wide variety of different ways with the public, being able to share open analysis methodologies and tradecraft with the public, examples of information products and applications that help to tell the story, and then ultimately some form of citizen outreach. So I mentioned before this wave, this change that's occurred over law enforcement, and we've seen this, and that's really what's pushing at this point, over 100 counties to try to share their information with the public through the Data-Driven Justice Initiative. Now we have this challenge of, now how do we actually coordinate with health and human services agencies? Not once, while I was working for a police department or was a CIO, in this case of a city, not a county, did we actually interact regularly with health and human services agencies. It was not something that occurred on a regular basis, and I think it was a problem that we faced as far as understanding the complexity of the issues that were striking our community. There was addiction, there was mental health, there's a wide variety of things that we had half of the picture for. So we're staring down the barrel of another crisis now, opioid epidemic. There's no doubt about it, and I don't need to go into the details or the statistics about it. But what we have are these silos of information that continue to grow at this point. How do we actually get an accurate picture of what's occurring in our communities? How do we own this? How do we bring the people that need to come to the table to actually communicate with the public and share the right pieces of information in order to be able to help to make some decisions to ultimately mitigate this epidemic? And on one side of the line, you've got first responders who are seeing it every day, who are going from call to call, that are deploying naloxone deployments, that are recording information in a wide variety of ways over overdoses, over seizures, drug seizures, over just basic intel about where this problem is occurring. And on the other side, you have epidemiologists and public health officials and people that are recording information about drug drop boxes and medical examiners that have an entirely different picture that they're looking at. And what we really need to be able to do is to actually bring them together through some common data sharing best practices so that we're all at the same table to be able to enable a task force that's able to interpret those key performance indicators, how it's going, to get the resources that's necessary by talking about grant mitigation or grants, and then also to inform those elected officials that want to own and understand how to mitigate this issue. On the other hand, we have to serve the public through open data pages, through ways in which we're requesting information, that we're listening to the public, and finding the right ways to actually come together. This drives a strategy that improves the education, the treatment, and ensures the effective response and prevention strategies that we need desperately to even start to understand this problem, let alone start to mitigate it and place our resources in the right place for it. We have a project that we've been working with LA on. It's called the Hub Project. And so essentially what it is that LA's big city, big county, and there's a lot of individual departments, 28 actually, that are utilizing our mapping software in a variety of different ways. If it's either public works with service requests and work orders, we've got judges that are using it, and we've got law enforcement and all the way down to the Department of Transportation. There's a wide variety of people that are using this software, but then are now trying to find the way in which to share and understand now at this point, how do we actually come together on some of these initiatives to be able to focus on them collectively through both a series of closed data and open data. What was interesting is once all of this information started to get shared with the public, the biggest consumers of it were actually the city. And that they were coming back, and they were coming back to this data portal, using the data that they have in it, starting to build their own dashboards, develop their own metrics that are associated with collaboration and cooperation towards these problems, and then essentially get to the point where they can empower elected officials, in this case Mayor Garcetti, with being able to own a measured key performance indicators around an initiative. So one of the main ones here in this case is Vision Zero. And what I think is interesting about it is that I think the same thing can apply to issues like reentry, issues like the opioid epidemic. How do we actually, what gets measured gets done. So how do we share collectively this information in a way that enables us to be able to achieve some of these objectives? And so essentially what we want to be able to do is to inform the public with the data that we have and that we've collected together in the same place. We want to gather feedback from them, we want to listen, and then we want to monitor this initiative as it continues to grow. And it's a configurable setup here in this case. I won't go into a lot of the details on the product itself, but the configuration is set to be able to basically point to some existing fields that you're sharing through open data and automatically start to hydrate this initiative. In a way, we're sharing best practices from city to city. Vision Zero is one around collisions. LA is horrific to walk around, to try to, just people, drive half a mile just to be able to get to another store on the other end. It's and when now the economy changing the way that not everybody can drive. People are walking. People are riding their bikes, and it's producing one of the most dangerous environments that you can imagine. So the goal is to try to achieve zero preventable collisions and deaths. And so to be able to do that, that takes the coordination, that takes the ownership of elected officials, and it takes the coordination of multiple agencies and their data to ultimately set about what are some indicators, what are some ways, some pieces of data, some fields that come together to be able to inform, essentially to share, to tell the story, to listen to the public, and to monitor how this is going over time. And so, this becomes a way in which now elected officials have a fulcrum to motivate, to change bureaucracy, to change information flows in order to be able to understand and better achieve those initiatives once we've set them about and set them into motion. Now, it takes a growth path. It takes learning. It doesn't happen just immediately. It takes achieving a level of maturity as far as information exchange is concerned. But to go from this point of ad hoc data sharing to formalizing ultimately how it is that we're engaging regularly with the citizens and how we're maintaining the data behind the scenes in order to be able to facilitate that level of engagement, ultimately leading towards a level of sustained engagement where the community regularly partners on these kinds of initiative projects. So it's it's a vision, it's a way of getting there, and it's one that we hope to achieve. So thank you.
So as I mentioned, John is filling in for Michael from Amazon Web Services. And so I was surprised to realize you were in this space. So tell us a little bit about, although I shouldn't be, between you and Google, you guys run the world, and then we have Watson. So we're just trying to figure out our role. But more of your background and tell us what you're doing with Amazon.
Sure. So good morning, everybody. My name is John Stevenson. I'm the Senior Manager for Public Policy for Amazon Web Services, or AWS for short. I know you all came here excited about Michael Jackson. Unfortunately, he got stuck on a plane somewhere over New York due to the weather. So he should be here later today, and I think you'll be seeing him this weekend. So I am your pinch hitter. Just as we obsess over our customers for Prime and AWS, we obsess over you. So doggone it, you got a speaker. So what I do is I'm with our public policy team, and my job is to work with state and local governments to understand the art of the possible when it comes to technology, to identify ways to create opportunities to use technology to solve big problems, and if there are things preventing you from taking advantage of these technologies, how to remove them. I have a very defined sense of mission as the son of public school teachers and also as a former government employee myself. The work you'd all do matters. So from Amazon's perspective, we want to make sure you can do everything you can to do your jobs and to help you delight your constituents wherever they may be. So Amazon Web Services, for those who may not be totally familiar, we are the cloud computing division of Amazon, and like our parent, we seek to be Earth's most customer-centric company when it comes to IT. We provide IT services on demand over the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing, a revolutionary concept when we unveiled it in 2006. Initially, it was very popular with startups. Then it became very popular with enterprises, and now increasingly it's very popular with governments at all levels around the world. Why? Because they are seeking to provide more services under greater demands with more constraints, and they want the speed, the agility, the security, and the cost effectiveness that the cloud has provided to startups from NASA to Netflix to the Navy to the state of California. So we're increasingly seeing a lot of uptake and adoption and very exciting things happening in the local space, particularly in county governments. I'm a resident of Arlington County, Virginia, and with what they've been doing around technology in this space and other counties across the country has been nothing short of revolutionary. They're changing the game in the delivery of services, in the analytics of challenges facing constituents, and coming up with new ways to do their jobs. One of which is the area around data-driven justice. As the panel highlighted earlier, the White House has been very interested in this topic, and under the Obama administration, they launched this initiative, which has involved a lot of counties, including, I believe, some who are represented in this room, like Bexar County and others. The challenge was, one we're all familiar with. We have increasing demands on our corrections budgets. Corrections populations are growing. Prisons are overcrowding. There are some very tragic incidents happening in the corrections space and local government. Surely something can be done, but what is the problem? What is the solution? Governments, the private sector, nonprofits, they know there's something there, that something can be done, but how do they get those insights? So thanks to the White House's leadership of NACo, the Arnold Foundation, and others, there was a desire to come together and to discuss how what's happening in the corrections area, what's happening in the mental health space in local government, and what potential technology might have to provide a solution. So Amazon Web Services stepped up because we're a peculiar company. We like taking on these big challenges, whether it's delivery anywhere in 30 minutes or less, whether it is mapping a genome in record time, collecting and analyzing data from space telescopes, moving petabyte-scale data warehouses. We love taking this on. We're naturally a curious company of builders. So when we were asked to come in and see if we could help lend some insights to what's happening with recidivism and what's happening with prisons, we leapt at the chance. What we heard from the leader of this effort, Lynn Oberman, was with the White House and now with the Arnold Foundation. The big challenge was, I'm sure a problem you're all familiar with, is how do we make the connections in the data? How do we gain the insights? We have data that's siloed. Transportation isn't talking to public safety. Public safety is not talking to health. The map folks aren't talking to the education folks. And the challenge is the data doesn't communicate. We can't integrate the two data sets. And if we could get some really, we believe, fantastical insights into what's happening out there to help you, your customers, your county officials make the decisions that have to be made. And so we thought about the problem, and we actually had some very basic solutions that we thought could help. We noted that a lot of the data is in data sets that can be made open and available and uploaded and shared using cloud technologies at a very low cost. Additionally, another problem that came up is many of these data sets are regulated. Phil talked about HIPAA data, CGIS data. County officials came to us and said, we have these compliance frameworks that we have to comply with, but we don't know how we're going to do that and bring them all together. Well, the cloud offers a solution in that the compliance frameworks like CGIS and HIPAA are built into AWS and other providers out there. So to do analysis, our technologies are well built to handle that. So what we did was we convened a meeting of technologists, of government officials from the federal, state, and local levels, researchers, and we brought them together for meetings to discuss what we have for technology, what they have as a problem, what they have as data, and we showed them how they can build technologies, their own solutions, to analyze, to map, to leverage initiatives that counties like Bear are doing, what partners like Esri are doing, to bring it all together in one place. The results, although still in the early stages, are quite amazing. I'm going to call out one example in particular. Miami-Dade County, Florida, is a large, growing county with a very diverse population. They have had some real challenges with recidivism, with responding to police calls. Their budgets are going through the roof. The prisons are overcrowding. What they found when they took their data using cloud technologies, working with partners like those up here on this stage, they found that 97 people in all of Miami-Dade County were responsible for $13 million in county services alone. Police, fire, ambulance, emergency medical. These 97 individuals were calling 911, asking for help. The police were responding. And so what they did was with this insight, they worked with their public health, worked with their police and their 911 services. They gave new training to the police and to 911 into how to spot and intervene in mental health cases and how to connect them more quickly. What Miami-Dade saw was they saw a reduction in the number of police calls, but they saw an increase in the county mental health services, which is what it was meant to do. But with the reduced police calls, reduced the number of times people were going into the courts, into the jailhouses, they were able to reduce the cost to the extent that they were able to close one full jail and save the money and reinvest it into the county. That is just one case we have seen so far. We have seen after these results, we have seen the Arnold Foundation. We've also seen communities like Iowa City, Iowa, starting to use the same practices to learn from others who've been using these technologies and wanting to spread it out there. So we've been working with our county customers, with our partners, to develop templates, best practices, to get our technology, our information out there. From the public policy team, we've also been working very closely with legislatures in states across the country to educate them that these solutions are out there to help counties save money. We've also been working with counties to make sure that if there are any policy blockers or compliance frameworks, we can help you comply with them. Contracts. We've been working very closely with U.S. Communities, the contract vehicle available to many of you, to make sure that you can buy these technologies as quickly and as easily as you can buy a pair of shoes on Amazon. So those are just some of the things we're working on to get these technologies out there very quickly. That's all I can really think of based on this pinch-hitting opportunity I've taken.
I hope my 11-year-old doesn't buy one.
But I'm
He's
happy to
always
take
a
questions,
digital native,
and we'll
always
be
buying stuff.
here after the presentation.
Mama,
Thank you.
I bought the cloud.
John, for a pinch hitter, you did really well. Thank you
Yeah.
to each of the panelists before we take questions.
Good job.
Okay, we do have time for questions. Anyone? Wow, you answered all the questions. Do you have a question or
Well,
a comment?
I will just say that a lot of this information I've spoken about is available on our website, aws.amazon.com. If anyone wants to follow up about data-driven justice or anything that AWS is doing in your communities, or what we're doing with other big projects, whether it be transportation, healthcare, happy to follow up after this.
Okay. Any comments or questions? You know, it is that time. It is that time, and I appreciate that. I understand. You guys did a great job, and thank you. It's always tough, you know, being right before lunch. So what we're going to do now is kind of get up, keep your places. I think lunch is outside, and you're going to bring it in. We have a few speakers who are going to share some stuff. We've used every second we can to kind of put information in there. And I also want to, you know, thank Jeff, my partner in crime here. It's been really fun working with NACo and putting this program together. This is a lot of new stuff, and we've kept things moving. And some of you say, well, maybe it's too much or too short. Be very interested in your feedback. So a couple of things very quickly. Reminder, be at the GIS subcommittee tomorrow morning at 7:30, and yes, there's breakfast. Be at the IT subcommittee and talk about what you would like to see in terms of new programming. So these are things that we have for you to make this an ongoing program, to help you to kind of stake out what are the new cutting-edge issues that concern you that we should be spending more time in. The other thing that we do, I recognized Barry, who is our certified government CIO, one of our recent graduates. I didn't mean to slide two other folks in the room, but Glenn Angst and Rita Reynolds also are certified CIOs, and thanks to Rita and coming to this forum, Rita said, I'm willing to try with my county CIOs in the state of Pennsylvania, and that was 6-7 years ago. And Rita was gracious enough, and we had our first class. And the reason why I mention it is that this is a great way to keep up on things ongoing. And PTI does offer, I think, one of the better certified government CIOs, and we accept vendors. No other group does. So if you want, there's still a couple of seats left and some really interesting discounts. And join me in LAX Airport next Wednesday, where we begin our West Coast class. If you miss that opportunity, the next classes won't start till 2018. So with that, is there a question? Were you standing for a question? Okay, I got nervous. Oh my God, it's a question. Okay, so those are just some householding things. So enjoy lunch, come back, mingle, and then we do have some folks. We have really a good friend of mine who's going to say some words, who is the state CIO for the state of Ohio. So I'm very excited about his remarks. And what's really great is how well you work together in this state. In terms of Franklin County and with the state, that's not often the case. How many of you work closely with your state CIOs? Good. That's a growing trend and a great resource. All right, let's take a break, have lunch. We come back in here. Thank you. Thank you. Really, set the stage perfect. All right, I've got you. What? Oh, rain? Boy, I got here before rain. Yes. Really? Oh, no. All right, Franklin County is 10th. Second largest county in Ohio. I explained it with our new Carradine. Said, count me in. And he knows the state CIO, so they just stepped out. Yeah.
What I wanted to do is find out
I'm going to have to make it spontaneous. I think we're just going to, as you are here, then I'm going to weave in after lunch.